Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to have yet another great late night conversation here on this YouTube channel. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell, and away we go.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. Should be a great late night conversation. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. Now we are going to talk about an important topic tonight about Africa and the future of Africa, etc. Important events. But before we get to that, just a quick review about the way we do things on this channel. For those of you who may not be familiar, the way we do things here is that I give my opening remarks. And my opening remarks are just me talking about whatever it is I'm going to talk about, current events, news events, politics, etc. And then after that, I do the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera, and that is always good. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a super chat on YouTube or a Rumble rant on the Rumble. I'm on both channels, and I am very happy to engage with you. Happy to answer your questions. Very, very rarely is there a question I cannot answer, but for the most part, send me a super chat, and I will send you an answer. And I do my best. And sometimes people, they pitch me a softball, and I knock it out of the park, you know? People send me good questions and I give them good answers. So, yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Couple quick announcements. First things first, coming up in Los Angeles, is the Peace Cup, the Los Angeles Peace Cup 2024, happening not this coming weekend, but the following weekend. And it is going to be great. And this is to set the stage for Peace Cup 2025, which is aiming to be held in Pyongyang. This is an international soccer tournament that happens every year. It's dedicated to promoting world peace and cooperation between countries. And the goal is to have it in Pyongyang in 2025. So hope to see you there in Los Angeles. Details of my travel are not yet confirmed, but it looks like I'll be headed out there for the Peace Cup 2025. Or 2024, and it's going to be good. I was just out there in LA, gave a great talk about North Korea and peace with North Korea, etc. So keep in mind the Peace Cup is coming up. The other announcement is that the organization behind this whole thing is called the Center for Political Innovation, CPIUSA.org. The Center for Political Innovation. That is the name of our group. And we are a group of people who are trying out new ideas. We're studying imperialism and anti-imperialism. We'd like to build a mass movement for jobs and a government of action that fights for working families. So if you'd like to join the Center for Political Innovation, we'd love to have you. We would love to have you as a member. We have got almost 160 members around the country. And we are always growing, and we've always got some very, very exciting projects we are working on. So I just want to let you know the organization behind all of this is the Center for Political Innovation. Very, very, very good. So, yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. First, my opening remarks for tonight. Then after that, after my opening remarks, from there, we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, and then I answer your questions. So send me some super chats or Rumble rants for me to answer in the second half of our show. So tonight, folks, I thought I would talk about Africa and the future of Africa from a couple different angles. The first angle would be this latest news development. And I will just read you the news article from today, June 17th, 2024. Zimbabwe reveals satellite plans. Harare has announced its intention to put a second spacecraft in orbit. Zimbabwe plans to launch its second satellite, ZimSat-2, in November, aiming to enhance the country's data transmission and space technology capabilities, the local news agency Bulawayo24 reported on Monday. Pre-launch tests for ZimSat-2 have reportedly been completed. According to the country's Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, Professor Aman Mirwa, the Zimbabwe National Geospatial and Space Agency, ZINGSA, is finalizing technological preparations ahead of a winter launch. We are now waiting for the appropriate window for the perfect space weather, which is in November, he told journalists. Several other space projects are underway and will be announced in due course, Mirwa added. ZINGSA coordinator Panos Gueme explained the initial May 26 launch date was postponed because the primary payload was not ready, which pushed the date to November. The launches are done in seasons, and this means we have also missed the June, July, August window, so now we will wait for November window. The launch will now be done in November, Gueme said. ZimSat-2 will be equipped with advanced sensors and imaging devices to support mineral exploration and environmental hazard monitoring and drought management. Zimbabwe launched its first observation satellite, ZimSat-1, in November of 2022. The spacecraft was deployed into orbit in December and transmits data to a command center at the Mazawe ground station. Since its development, ZimSat-1 has monitored ongoing droughts and facilitated mine mapping projects. Zimbabwe plans to deploy 3 more Earth observation satellites in the coming years. According to the latest report from Space Hubs Africa, 59 satellites have been launched by 15 African countries to date, with South Africa being the first in 1998. By 2025, the outlets expect 125 new African satellite development projects to be completed. Folks, Africa is launching satellites into orbit. That is amazing. And let me tell you, that would never have happened without communism. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union, if it wasn't for the Chinese Revolution, if it wasn't for the mass national liberation and anti-colonial movements that have been laying the basis for the independence of modern Africa, we would not have a situation like we have today. 59 satellites have been launched from the African continent. And I can guarantee you that if the Western imperialists had had their way, there would have been 0 satellites launched from the African continent as of today. Let's not forget that the first country to ever launch a satellite into orbit was the Soviet Union that launched Sputnik. And it was the Soviet Union that gave aid to Nelson Mandela when Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist by the American government because he was supported by the Soviet Union, because he fought against the apartheid regime of South Africa. It was the Soviet Union that gave him weapons and support and military aid. And Nelson Mandela praised Gaddafi, and he praised Fidel Castro, and he praised the Soviet Union, and he even praised Stalin in his early writings. Let us not forget that. And it was South Africa in 1998 that became the first African country to launch a spacecraft into orbit. And let us also not forget that almost all of Southern Africa is led by movements that emerged as communist-led anti-colonial movements. In South Africa, it was the African National Congress. In Zimbabwe, that is about to launch their second satellite, it was the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU-PF. In Namibia, it was the Southwest African People's Organization, or SWAPO. In Mozambique, it was Frelimo. I don't remember what that stands for, but that's the movement in Mozambique. In Angola, it was the MPLA, the Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the People's Liberation Movement of Angola, the MPLA, which presided over a huge amount of economic growth after the 25 years of civil war came to an end in 2002. It is communism. It is the rise of Russia and China that laid the basis for Africa to be reborn. And right now, the partnership between Russia and Africa and China and Africa is essential. It is absolutely essential. And I'm going to show you how essential it is, because this is another recent news item that just happened. I don't know if you saw this, but in Switzerland, or in Switzerland, they had a conference about solving the Ukraine crisis. It was a peace conference, supposedly, that they held in Switzerland. But they forgot to invite Russia. Right? They're going to solve the Ukraine war. Russia and Ukraine are at war, and they forgot to invite Russia. Not much hope for solving the conflict if you don't invite Russia. But it's worse than that. Not only did they not invite Russia to the conference, but they blocked South Africa from speaking. And I'm going to show you the news story right here.
Africa was not able to speak in the plenary sessions of this conference. Hence, this written statement outlining our position given the importance of this summit and especially in the current global context. Our starting point must be that Russia and Ukraine should find themselves on a road to peace. Our actions should not foreclose the possibility of Russia and Ukraine finding their way to the negotiating table.
Professor Mufamadi says South Africa participated in this process in order to contribute to finding peace. So him not being given a chance to speak is clearly no coincidence. And if you know anything about propaganda, nothing happens by accident. Word choices, especially the mention of particular countries or particular people, are carefully selected to convey certain messages in summits, particularly summits like these ones. Mufamadi further rejected the summit's communique that was adopted by most of the nations and international organizations, saying to resolve the ongoing crisis, diplomatic engagement through dialogue needs to be given more consideration. Basically, Russia not being present defeats the purpose of this whole summit.
We must focus on creating conditions for dialogue, for building trust between the parties, engaging with both sides. Our efforts should be on engaging in dialogue, fostering it, and promoting steps to end the war, not to manage the war.
He also objected to the communique's paragraph which stated that any threat or use of nuclear weapons in the context of ongoing war against Ukraine is inadmissible. Mufamadi said this narrowed the prohibition on the threat or use of nuclear weapons to the Ukraine context only, whereas the prohibition applies globally. And South Africa will continue to be a leading proponent of total prohibition on the threat or use of nuclear weapons in any context. We have also Saudi Arabia, India, Thailand, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and the UAE, who were also among participants that declined to sign the communique. We saw Iraq and Jordan withdrawing their signatures of the declaration following the peace summit as well. The reasons for the Iraqi refusal with Jordan are currently unknown, but what we do know is that Zelensky failed to win over key nations from the global south, casting a shadow over Kyiv's bid to broaden support against Russia. We also know that the absence of a substantial African presence at such a publicized yet failed agenda speaks volume of Zelensky's or the West's inability to sway the continent. Only 5 African leaders were present at the summit, and there were only 30.
Did you hear that? At this peace summit that they organized, only 5 African leaders were present. How many countries are in Africa? How many countries are there in Africa? Let's Google that. How many countries in Africa? 54 countries in Africa. But this global peace summit about solving the Ukraine crisis in Switzerland only invited 5 African countries. And one of those African countries was South Africa, and they did not let them speak.
African delegations from 54 African countries. Another significant obstacle is credibility, because the once neutral Switzerland has made no secret of its desire to punish Russia. Swiss foreign minister even questioned motives of those countries attended the summit, asking, do they just want peace for their own gain, or they support Ukraine?
The African participants told very clearly, we are here because we have to solve this problem. This was one. And the other, and the second was very, very important sentence and very difficult. I mean, they want to solve the problem in order to re-establish the food security in their countries. And the question was, of course, are you ready to solve the problems in the direction of just and sustainable peace, or just in a direction of peace? It is a kind of dilemma in that they want to solve the problem, but they see that they could solve the problem not in the sense of a just peace for Ukraine.
And of course, the talks did center around global food security. Even Kenyan president regretted that the war has had such devastating impact across Africa, saying that Kenya had not been spared as the conflict had led to increased prices of fertilizers. President Ruto went as far as faulting the European Union and the United States over the seizure of Russian assets due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, saying that what most of the EU member states were doing was against the spirit of the United Nations. The episode over this weekend points to an uncomfortable reality for the US and its allies, because for the global south, the war is regrettable but has to be managed by dialogue and compromises. In fact, India's foreign minister once put the view of these global south countries in a nutshell when he said, Europe thinks that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. These words have surprised many Western leaders who have concluded, probably correctly, and over the weekend, that if the United States cannot persuade the global south into agreeing, its own global influence and power is probably weakening.
That's right. That's right. Europe mistakes its own problems for the world's problems, right? Very commonly said. And, I've heard people talk about that in the past, but let's take a look at Nelson Mandela, the founder of modern South Africa, the man who defeated apartheid, right? He must have been a good free market capitalist, right? Because clearly he must have hated all those evil regimes that we're told to hate by CNN, right? Well, take a look.
Want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. That we can and we will never do. We have our own struggle, which we are conducting. We are grateful to the world for supporting our struggle. But nevertheless, we are an independent organization with its own policy. And the attitude of every country towards, our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle. Yasser Arafat, Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro support our struggle to the hilt. There is no reason whatsoever why we should have any hesitation about hailing their commitment to human rights as they are being demanded in South Africa. Our attitude is based solely on the fact that they fully support the anti-apartheid struggle. They do not support it only in rhetoric. They are placing resources at our disposal for us to win the struggle. That is the position.
Having said that, I think I would be dishonest if I did not express profound disappointment with the answer that Mr. Mandela gave to the previous question, because it suggests a certain degree of amorality. It suggests that what these people do in their own countries, what a Gaddafi does in Libya, what a Castro does in Cuba, is totally irrelevant, even in terms of the issue of human rights, as long as they support the cause of the ANC. I hope that is not what Mr. Mandela meant, and I would hope that he would clarify that issue further.
Mr. Mandela.
And at the same time, want me to be involved in the internal affairs of Libya and Cuba. I refuse to do that. As far as Yasser Arafat is concerned, I explained to Mr. Sigmund that we identify with the PLO because just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination. I went further, however, to say that the support for Yasser Arafat in his struggle does not mean that the ANC has ever doubted the right of Israel to exist as a state legally. We have stood quite openly and firmly for the right of that state to exist within secured borders. But, of course, as I said to Mr. Sigmund in Geneva and others, that we carefully define what we mean by secure borders. We do not mean that Israel has the right to retain the territories they conquered from the Arab world, like the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. We don't agree with that. Those territories should be returned to the Arab people.
Mr. Mandela.
I also explained to Mr. Sigmund and company that in our organization we have Jews. In fact, Mr. Gaddafi did not allow us to open our offices in Libya precisely because we had the courage to say to him, we work with the Jews in our organization. And he didn't allow us to open an office until February this year, when he had to accept us as we are. We are not prepared to be swayed by anybody. We have an independent policy which we assert no matter with whom we discuss. The Jewish leader have any doubts about our stand, I am prepared to address them and to allay their concern, because they are a very important community both in South Africa and, of course, in the States. And I'm prepared to iron out any differences that might exist. But they must know what our stand is. Arafat is a comrade in arms, and we treat him as such. And as I have said, we have many Jews, members of the Jewish community in our struggle, and they have occupied very top positions. But that does not mean to say that the enemies of Israel are our enemies. We refuse to take that position. You can call it being political or a moral question, but for anybody who changes his principles depending on whom he is dealing, that is not a man who can lead a nation.
Yeah. So there you go. That was the founder of South Africa, the first African country to launch spacecraft into orbit. But yeah, we got plenty we can talk about tonight. First of all, I just never get tired of looking at this monument. This is one of the most, I'll just say this is the most beautiful statue, the most beautiful monument I have ever seen. Right? And I don't think I have ever seen a monument that I like more. This is like the ideal monument. All right. It says so much. I'll show it. I got a couple different angles of it. That's another angle so you can see how big it is. Just absolutely beautiful. This is the Senegalese monument to independence. All right. The monument for the independence of Senegal. All right. Here it is. We got a couple different angles. And it is beautiful on a number of different levels, right? It was built by North Korea. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea built this beautiful monument as a way of showing solidarity with the people of Senegal and their history of anti-colonialism. And it is absolutely beautiful on a number of levels. And I will tell you why. First things first, it is pro-natal. It has a baby on it. It's saying we need more people in the world and that having children is a good thing, not a bad thing. That's very, very important because right now, especially when it comes to the African continent, the position of the imperialists is a degrowth position. Is a position that there are too many people in the world and we need to reduce the population. And this monument celebrates having children. It has a little child pointing to the future, saying we want a better future for our children. That's the first thing I like about this monument. The second thing I like about this monument is it glorifies physical strength, right? It shows a very, very muscular African man. right? That is not an overweight man. That is not a skinny man. That is a very, very muscular man. It is presenting the African people not as poor, oppressed victims, not as people to feel sorry for, right? South Park used to have that very, very offensive joke about starving Marvin, the Ethiopian or whatever. That is not the image. It shows the African people as the heroes of their own liberation, with a very, very muscular and physically fit man leading the way, holding up his infant son and holding his wife. I assume they're married. I mean, we don't know. There's no wedding rings, I guess, but I assume they're married, right? Showing a strong, physically fit African man as the center of the icon with his child on the monument. In addition to that, it has the mother on the other side, and he's holding her up, meaning that women must be held up as part of the liberation struggle, right? That women are an important part. They are half of humanity. Women hold up half the sky. And that the family, the mother and the father coming together and loving each other and raising up their child points toward the way to the future. And you notice they're all both looking upward. They're looking upward. And that is very, very important too, because the future is bright. The future is great. There is development on the horizon. There is hope and technological progress. Tomorrow will be better than today. And this is the best monument I have ever seen. And it is not a coincidence that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, one of the most relentless and heroic communist governments in the world, a government that has endured years of blockade and sanctions and threats and never surrendered, that they built this amazing monument. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that it is not a coincidence that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea built this phenomenal monument. And I hope that someday I get to visit Senegal and see it for myself. I would like to see this monument up close because it's a damn good monument. This is the best monument I have ever seen. This, folks, is called socialist realism. I don't know if you're aware of this, but before the CIA funded modern art, before the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program, before left-wing and socialist politics was distorted, this is the kind of art that leftists, socialists, and communists promoted. Socialist realism that made ordinary people, fathers and mothers and children and soldiers and farmers and bricklayers and teachers and lawyers and ordinary people into heroes. Socialist realism. During the Great Depression, when millions of Americans lost their jobs, Roosevelt hired the unemployed and he put them to work building post offices and painting murals throughout the United States. And the murals and post offices the murals in the post offices and the murals in the union halls and the art that was built was socialist realist art. It was this kind of art. They called it, in the Soviet Union, where it was being made to promote the project of building a communist government, they called it socialist realism. In the United States, when it was built to build a working class movement, but not necessarily to glorify a communist government, they called it social realism. But this was the kind of art that was celebrated and promoted by the global communist movement until the CIA started funding abstract art and modern art, and the work of Jackson Pollock. This is our movement. And today in Moscow, if you go to the Moscow subway system, you will see this same kind of art. You will see this same kind of beautiful socialist realist art that celebrates humanity, celebrates looking toward the future, celebrates the working class, celebrates the struggles and the sacrifices of the common people, celebrates the dignity of human labor. This is amazing. And it also points to the very, very close relationship that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has with the global anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movement. And I've got plenty more to say about that. Plenty more to say on that topic, because as I mentioned, it is Zimbabwe that is the country that's about to launch its second satellite. And so I am going to show you a couple video clips about Zimbabwe and about what they are doing. This first one is after Robert Mugabe died. After the death of Robert Mugabe, Harpal Brar, our good friend, he does a regular podcast with us, Harpal Brar, he went on RT to defend the legacy of Robert Mugabe and his anti-colonial revolution, his redistribution of land, etc. So this is Robert Mugabe, this is Robert Mugabe being honored by Harpal Brar.
Former long-time Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe died on Friday in Singapore, aged 95. Once a celebrated symbol of Africa's post-colonial era, Mugabe's former party, which still governs Zimbabwe, held him a national hero.
A veteran nationalist and a dogged Pan-Africanist fighter, Comrade Mugabe bequeaths a rich and indelible legacy of tenacious adherence to principle on the collective rights of Africa and Africans in general, and in particular the rights of the people of Zimbabwe.
Under his early leadership, Zimbabwe emerged from British rule and entered a period of glowing prosperity, which led the way in Africa.
I will not lie. I was so sad we have lost our country's hero.
Right now, things are much worse, and there is economic uncertainty. For me, he was a good ruler. He made sure commodities were affordable.
Indian left-wing politician Harpal Brar thinks that Zimbabwe's dire economic situation is partly due to Western sanctions.
Government is dealing with the difficult situation because Zimbabwe has been subject to international sanctions organized by the various main countries like Britain, United States of America, France, and everybody else in the Western world. So they have been suffering a lot. But don't get the idea that Zimbabwean people are starving. They're not starving. They're not starving precisely because the majority of them live in the countryside. And they were given land which they cultivate, and they eat far better than they ever did during the days of the white minority regime.
Thanks for joining us here on RT International. We're back at the top of the hour.
All right. Yeah, and the reason that's important, what he pointed out there, is, and it's actually important to talk about Zimbabwe. We're going to talk a lot about Zimbabwe tonight. It's really important to talk about Zimbabwe because in light of the Israel-Palestine confrontation and the escalation since October 7th, a lot of people go around saying, does Israel have the right to exist? Does Israel have the right to exist? And, oh my God, you want to wipe Israel off the map. You want to wipe Israel off the map. Well, folks, I want to tell you that there used to be a country called Rhodesia, and it was named after Cecil Rhodes, the British colonizer. And Rhodesia had no right to exist. Did you hear that? Rhodesia, a settler colonial regime where the black people had no rights and white landowners owned all the land and exploited the African people as semi-second-class citizens with no rights. Rhodesia had no right to exist. And Rhodesia was wiped off the map. And that was a good thing when Rhodesia got wiped off the map. There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying that a colonial settler regime that treats the people who actually live there as second-class citizens and enables the people who are from Europe to live over them and exploit them and live in luxury off of them, there is nothing wrong with saying that such a society, one, has no right to exist. And on top of that, there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying that such a society should be wiped off the map. And Rhodesia was wiped off the map. And the result has been the empowerment of the African people. It has been a society created where the land is redistributed to the African people. And on top of that, they are about to launch their second spacecraft into orbit. So if someone says to you, oh, do you want to wipe Israel off the map? Say, well, did you want to wipe Rhodesia off the map? Someone says to you, oh, does Israel have the right to exist? Say, did Rhodesia have the right to exist? Right? I mean, this arrogance with which Israeli sympathizers speak. Let's look at the history of colonial countries and their destruction. Let's watch an interview with Robert Mugabe, the founder of Zimbabwe. This is Robert Mugabe speaking before he came to power, when he was still waging a civil war, when he was still waging the so-called Rhodesian Bush War, which was the war of national liberation against the white colonizers.
Not fight these grievances by pleading for their rectification. You can only do so by getting to the root cause of the problem, and that's the problem of power.
But at that point, you were firmly committed to achieving power through the ballot box.
Yes, through the ballot box, that's right.
At what stage did you very first consider that it might be necessary, in your view, to use a gun?
To use petrol bombs as far back as 1960, and we were the first to use them, but purely as a means of pressure, not really to try and destroy life, but to intimidate the authorities into conceding, as it were, to our wishes.
Did it work?
It didn't work. Then we had demonstrations and strikes. She participated in one of the best organized demonstrations in the country, the women's demonstration. Thousands of them were sent to prison in Salisbury and thousands sent to prison in Bulawayo and Gwelo and Umtali in 1961.
It must be a terrible responsibility to have to bear, to know that you were instrumental in starting a war. I mean, however just you feel a conflict to be.
No. I didn't feel any conflict at all. I felt justified. There was the whole history of our having tried non-violent methods.
They tried nonviolent methods first. They did not want a violent revolution. And that's very, very important, right? Serious revolutionaries do not want a violent revolution. And even in apartheid conditions, even under the conditions of a colonial apartheid regime in Rhodesia, the communists still tried to take power peacefully. They still tried to organize a peaceful transition to socialism. And that is very, very important, right? The fetish for violent revolution you hear among young communists these days is really out of line, and it is childish, and it's middle class, and it's not serious politics, right? Even black people living under colonization tried peaceful means first.
They had failed completely, and neither the settler regime nor Britain heeded our cries. They just wouldn't move. They wouldn't yield an inch. And so we decided, without any qualms about it, that armed struggle would be the right thing.
Fighting a war which is a very difficult one, but in spite of the difficulties posed by the enemy, we take care not to make people unnecessarily suffer.
But I quote from your own publication, Zimbabwe News, all land to the tillers, socialism now, you have to hit a racist settler in the groin and skull hard, very, very hard, before you can get him to scream those words. That's what we proposed. That's what we will continue to do till final victory. Let us never forget that only a dead imperialist is a good one. Now, is that the kind of language that's likely to make soldiers behave responsibly?
This is only a dramatic way of saying we are waging a struggle to overthrow the settler system. It does not literally mean that we go all out to destroy the whites. No, we are fighting a just war aimed at the overthrow of the settler government, which is presently oppressing our people.
You see, I wonder whether language like that might not incite young men to commit the most appalling acts within the conflict.
No one is fighting an individual war. All our fighters are fighting collectively under a command that derives its authority from the central committee.
This question has been asked before, and I think what people would want to know is whether those who have committed genocide and massacres will become our friends tomorrow. I don't know what the Allies would have answered if a similar question had been asked in 1945, 1946, whether Hitler and Mussolini would become the allies of Churchill and Roosevelt. Our answer is that those who are architects of this genocide and massacres surely must, on the basis of moral and legal principles, be brought to trial. But this does not mean that the followers, the ordinary person, must be tried. Those who have hatched the plan, the treason, as a result of which massacres of all kinds have been perpetrated against our people and against the people of Mozambique, people of Zambia, Angola and Botswana, surely must be brought to book for their crime.
It is absolutely wrong to allow a set of individuals to acquire the ownership and possession of resources which are God-given. They're not man-made. The land, the water, the forests, the animals, the fish in the river, the minerals. These are given us by nature. And it is in principle wrong for any one man to claim ownership of such resources. We should belong to the people as a whole.
That is Robert Mugabe. That was the founder of modern Zimbabwe. And we're going to talk more about him later. We got plenty more to say. I'm going to show you a speech he gave at the UN, which I witnessed, by the way. I was in the room as a UN reporter when he gave the speech at the United Nations in 2015 at the UN General Assembly. It was very wild. Yeah, why don't we put on, let's talk about, there's a lot of history here that people don't talk about. One thing that is important to talk about is that at the time that the people of Zimbabwe were fighting for their national liberation, there was a whole movement called Friends of Rhodesia. And it was people that were raising money to try and keep the Rhodesian settler regime in power. One of the people who was part of Friends of Rhodesia was James Earl Ray, the assassin of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But here we go.
Rhodesian paratroops began an attack on two camps near Chimoio and Nyadzonia in Mozambique, described as terrorist bases. According to the UN, at one camp, there were no combatants, only refugees.
Planes came in the morning and carried out such massacres, dropped paratroopers, who then as ground force ringed this camp, these two camps. And as these youngsters started running in all directions, they were bayoneted. I'll never forget the sight of the little kids at the school where the bombs were dropped with their pencils and paper outside, and the little bodies scattered everywhere. It was so brutish, it was incredible. They killed the sick, dragging them from ambulances and beheading them. You see, to this day, we have not attacked one white school in the country. Not because those kids are defended. We have not attacked one white hospital in the country, when we are absolutely certain everyone sick in there is white. Princess Margaret Hospital, we could hit it tomorrow. We said no, it's barbaric, it doesn't belong to the 20th century, that's not the way you fight a war. If 400 children were killed in London or in New York, it would be a story never to forget. It would be everywhere. But no, it wasn't given any publicity at all abroad. It was just, you know, maybe because it's black kids. Maybe it's black women.
Yeah. Yeah, people forget how brutal the apartheid government of Rhodesia was and how heroic the people of Zimbabwe were in winning their freedom from the white colonizers and establishing what is now modern Zimbabwe. And, you know, here's another interview with a leader of the Zimbabwe National Liberation Movement.
You seem to dwell a lot on this question of socialism. Now, what you are trying to say to me, or what you're trying to suggest to me, what has been suggested to us over and over again, is that this idea of socialism will not work. In other words, we are being persuaded to get stuck with capitalism. During the 1920s, the 1930s, our fathers, our forefathers, worked like slaves, getting paid almost nothing to build the economic infrastructure. Now, is it not common sense that when we fight to liberate the country and want to introduce a new system, we should look for a system which is different from capitalism?
There is an expression in England, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I wonder if you look around Europe or Africa, whether you really believe that it's the socialist countries that are more efficient and happier.
I'm absolutely convinced that I would be happier in a socialist country. I've recently been to the United States, the show of capitalism there, the way it plays on your mind, even on television, when you ought to get more acquainted about the things that matter around the world. No, I shouldn't like to live under such a system.
Come to power, what would it mean for the ordinary small trader, the farmer, businessman?
We will obviously collectivize the national pillars of the economy. I mean mining, for example, railways, aerodesia, you know, the finance houses. Those top occupations which have national repercussions. But the government, from our point of view, the government has no business selling matches or Coca-Cola, for example, to people. The government has no business in running a dry cleaning shop, for example. Those small distributive and other social services are better left to the individual, to individuals who want to promote the quality of life, so that the fear of some state running human affairs right down to the family is foreign to our people, is foreign to our thinking, and we have no intention of creating a system like that. Socialism, yes, but it does not mean totalitarian dispossession.
Yeah, and that is a good point. That is a very, very good point. While we're at it, you know, why don't we hear from Kwame Nkrumah, or no, Kwame Ture? This is Stokely Carmichael. This was the leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Africa, or in the United States, the civil rights movement, the guy who coined the term Black Power. He changed his name to Kwame Ture, and he dedicated himself in the final years of his life to promoting Pan-Africanism and socialism. And you can watch hours and hours of speeches, by by Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. You can watch speeches by him talking about socialism. Very good stuff.
Pan-Africanism must come from the bottom up, from the masses of the people up. It is here then that we'll come to see the real aspect of Pan-Africanism. We said that in the 5th Pan-African Congress they called for mass organizations, and immediately mass organizations sprang up throughout the length and breadth of the African world. The Conventional People's Party, a mass party, sprang up in Ghana. The Democratic Party of Guinea, a mass party, sprang up in Guinea. Throughout the length and breadth of Africa, you had TANU, the Tanzanian African National Union, which is now the CCM. My Swahili is not as good as yours. Chumpa, Chimpuraza, Mazuri.
That's very good.
Oh, my Swahili is bad. Thank you. Chapa Chapman Puduzi. Exactly. And that's their new party. But all over Africa, mass parties sprung up. If you look at the Caribbean, mass parties sprung up. And if you look at the United States, mass movements sprang up. So the call was heeded for mass confrontation. Of course, the 5th Pan-African Congress made 2 definite and precise resolutions which I want to highlight. Of course, Pan-Africanism from the very beginning was anti-colonial. From the very beginning, it was anti-colonial. It was weak. So when they came, they didn't say to the Queen, we're going to put you out of the country. They said, you must treat the natives right. You must educate them. You must prepare them for self-government. These are things that are weak, but they were anti-colonial in essence. We must not look at the form. And we got stronger, the more this anti-colonialism will express itself. Now, anti-colonialism is nothing but anti-capitalism. Because colonialism is nothing but an offshoot, an aspect of capitalism. Therefore, if you're anti-colonial, you must be anti-capitalist, if you're logical in your thinking, of course, and your actions. Some people are not, but we are speaking of logical people here. Yes. If you're anti-capitalist, then you must be socialist. Capitalism cannot unite Africa. Africa has to be united by socialism. Now, there's a lot of confusion here on this question of capitalism and socialism. Just recently, a young man said to me, but socialism died. I said, it did? He said, you didn't hear about it? I said, I missed the funeral. Of course, he spoke about the betrayals that occurred in the East. You must not let capitalism confuse your thinking. This is a struggle which Pan-Africanism takes on. We struggle against imperialism in the ideological arena because many people think that capitalism just wants to exploit your labor. It wants to confuse your thinking and make you think just like them. And this is where the real fight occurs. So therefore, this struggle of confusing the thinking, I told the man, I said, you're talking nonsense. Socialism cannot disappear. It cannot die. He said, yes, it can. I said, no. He said, how do you say that? I said, well, you are judging socialism by socialists. You don't do that. He said, I've never heard such nonsense. If you don't judge socialism by socialists, what do you judge it by? I say, you judge it by its principles. Every system is judged by its principles, never its adherence. So he still saw confusion. He said, you're just talking double talk. I said, okay, do you judge Christianity by Christians? So we must not be confused here. Socialism doesn't fall because of betrayal. No system does. The person who betrays themselves goes to the mud, but the system, with its eternal principles, keep marching on. If a system fell because of betrayal, Christianity would have been finished with Judas. At least Judas had the dignity to hang himself. Some of these who betray socialism don't have that dignity. Gorbachev still runs around speaking and picking up 30 pieces of silver everywhere. So socialism is an economic system, and there can only be 2 in the world, capitalism or socialism, because every economic system must answer one fundamental question. Who will own and control the wealth of the country? Who will own and control the means of production? The question can only be answered 2 ways. Either a few will own or everyone will own. It's as simple as that. And under capitalism, we say, please summarize that we might have. No, I'm going. I thought I had 20 minutes. It's my time. I thought I had 20 minutes. I was going by the clock. How much time do I have left? I'm sorry. Maybe I'm off. That's what I thought I did. I was watching it. No, I'm watching my clock. I'm irresponsible. I'm revolutionary. I go by time. I got my clock right here. Matter of fact, I can say it in 2 words, Black Power. And today we've gone to 1, Pan-Africanism. So there are only 2 economic systems, and it's going to be capitalism or socialism. Capitalism is a backward system. There's no need to discuss it. Certainly anyone who's been made a slave by capitalism ought to be hesitant in trying to support the system. But as a conscious African, I must be against capitalism, and I must, of course, seek to destroy it. So when you speak of Pan-Africanism, you must understand you speak of socialism. And we want to underline there's only one socialism out here, and that's scientific socialism, whose principles are abiding and universal. There's no such thing as African socialism, Chinese socialism, Russian socialism, Arab socialism. There's only one socialism. The confusion arises over ideology. That is that which guides you towards your objective. So we're saying clearly here, Pan-Africanism is not an ideology. It is an objective. It is an achievable. Pan-Africanism is the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. All we want is a unified continent with a socialist system. That's all. But you know, Africa is the richest continent in the world. When she's properly organized, she'll be the most powerful. Yeah, of course. Of course. And me, all I want is power. I'm not like others. I don't want money. I don't want popularity. I just want the power I'm supposed to get. That's all. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, the Green Book by Gaddafi, which was the first book that the Center for Political Innovation ever published. It's important. There's a section of the Green Book in Gaddafi's Green Book. It was called Black People Will Prevail in the World. And it made the following prediction. And I'm just going to read it to you. The last age of slavery has been the enslavement of blacks by white people. The memory of this age will persist in the thinking of black people until they have vindicated themselves. This tragic and historic event, the resulting bitter feeling and the yearning or the vindication of the whole race constitute a psychological motivation of black people to vengeance and triumph that cannot be disregarded. In addition, the inevitable cycle of social history, which includes the yellow people's domination of the world when it marched from Asia and the white people carrying out wide-ranging colonialist movement covering all the continents of the world, is now giving way to the reemergence of black people. Black people are now in a very backward social situation, but such backwardness works to bring their numerical superiority because their low standard of living has shielded them from the methods of birth control and family planning. Also, their old social traditions place no limit on marriages, leading to their accelerated growth. The population of other races has decreased because of birth control, restrictions on marriage, and constant occupation work. Unlike blacks, who tend to be less obsessive about work in a climate which is continuously hot. So he's basically predicting that because black people have not gone along with the depopulation agenda of the ultra-rich, right? They've been trying to reduce the population. But because black people have not gone along with it, he's predicting that they will be the rulers of the world soon. That Africa will rise because human labor is the source of all wealth. It's very interesting that Gaddafi made that observation. In the 70s, he made the observation that black people will prevail in the world and that Africa is the future. And I do believe that Africa is the future because it's got a lot of people, it's got a lot of natural resources, it's got a lot of wealth, and it's in the process of asserting its independence in alliance with Russia and China. But I talked about Robert Mugabe before. This is Robert Mugabe's speech to the United Nations that I witnessed. I want to just put it on the screen here. This is, Robert Mugabe, when he was still alive in 2015, he gave a speech to the UN. And I'm gonna put it on. If I can just find the video here. I'm going to put it on because it was quite an important speech. Hold on. Just got to find out where the file is. All right. It was quite a powerful speech he gave. And I was in the room at the UN when he gave it. I was covering the UN for the TV network, Press TV at the time. And it was great to hear. And this is, they started redistributing the land of Zimbabwe. They started redistributing it. And that's when the sanctions and the demonization of Robert Mugabe began. But they didn't surrender. And there's been a lot. When I was at the World Youth Festival in 2017, I spoke with the delegation from Zimbabwe. And one thing they shared with me was that thanks to China, there is now a hotel near the Victoria Falls. They have the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, which is one of the natural wonders of the world. And it's thanks to China. There is now There is now, hold on, there is now at the Victoria Falls, there is a hotel and there is transportation to the Victoria Falls. This modern wonder of the world you can now see thanks to the assistance of China to Zimbabwe. But here we go. This is Zimbabwe at the UN.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Robert Mugabe, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Mr. Morgens Lickenthoff, President of the 70th session of the General Assembly, Your Majesties, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. Allow me at the outset to extend to you, Mr. Lickenthoff, my warm congratulations on your election to the high office of President of the 70th session of the General Assembly. You assume this office at an historic moment when the United Nations has just adopted an ambitious agenda for the future of humankind. The task ahead needs all hands on the deck, and you can count on our cooperation and support during your presidency. Mr. President, I wish to commend Mr. Sam Kutesa, a distinguished son of Africa, for the dynamism with which he steered this august body over the past year. We particularly appreciated his leadership in promoting inclusive dialogue and seeking consensus on the many sensitive issues that he presided over during his tenure of office. The theme of this session, I quote, "The United Nations at 70th, the road ahead of peace, security, human rights," unquote, aptly complements the deliberations of the summit meeting on the post-2015 development agenda. It is our expectation that the United Nations will draw from its 7 decades-long experiences to give birth to a new era of peace, equality, and justice, a new era that recognizes and fosters the commonality of our common fate through renewed international cooperation and solidarity. Mr. President, the African Union welcomes the priorities you have proposed, for they are in tandem with our own developmental plan, the Agenda 2063, which recognizes the intrinsic and inextricable linkages between peace, security, development, and the full realization of human rights. The African Union Constitutive Act recognizes that while peace and security are imperative for our progress, conflict is a major impediment to the socio-economic advancement and integration of the continent. Consequently, the Common African Position on the post-2015 development agenda designates peace and security as one of its 6 key pillars and a top priority for us. The prevalence of peace not only creates conducive conditions for development, but also ensures that the maximum possible resource can be dedicated to development programs and projects. We welcome and encourage the continued cooperation between the United Nations and the African Union, principally through the latter's Peace and Security Council, in advancing peace and security in Africa. Mr. President, in January this year, the leaders of the African Union adopted Agenda 2063 as our continent's plan to accelerate deepened economic integration of our countries and regions. Its main objective is to improve the well-being of the continent's citizenry through sustained and balanced economic growth. At the African Union Summit in Pretoria, South Africa in June this year, we agreed on the agenda's first 10-year development plan. During these initial 10 years, the flagship programs will include the creation of a continental free trade area, the African Center for Disease Control, a Pan-Africa University of Science and Technology to develop skills for the value addition and beneficiation of the continent's vast mineral resources, a single aviation market, a high-speed train, and a Pan-African e-network.
Amazing. That's development that he's talking about there. High-speed railway. Wow.
The successful implementation of Agenda 2063 calls not just for the commitment of African stakeholders, but also for the support and engagement of partners beyond the borders of our continent. Africa is not looking for handouts. Rather, it is looking for partners in massive infrastructural development, in creating and exploiting the value chains from the God-given natural resources, and in improving the quality of life of the continent's citizens. The entire world stands to benefit from an economically empowered African continent than from one emasculated by deprivation and with an over-dependence on others. Mr. President, adaptation to change is the most crucial ingredient for the vibrancy and effectiveness of any organization, including the United Nations. While the world has drastically changed since 1945, the United Nations and indeed the global governance architecture remains mired in a long bygone era. This archaic hierarchy among nations threatens to erode the confidence and support that the United Nations commands among the majority, but disadvantaged of its membership. We are disappointed that we have lost the opportunity of this anniversary to address this burning issue of the reform of the United Nations Security Council in a manner that satisfies the just demands and expectations of the majority among us. I wish to reiterate our strong attachment to Africa's common position on the reform of the Security Council contained in the Ezulwini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. I call on all genuine friends of Africa and all those who value justice, fairness, and democracy to support Africa's just and reasonable proposals. Mr. President, we equally call for the revitalization of the General Assembly, the sole universally representative and democratic organ of the United Nations so that it can effectively carry out its charter mandated responsibilities. Accordingly, we fully support the call for inclusivity and transparency in selecting our organization's Secretary General by ensuring that the General Assembly plays a more significant role in that process. After all, the Secretary General is at the service of all the member states and not only that of an exclusive, privileged few. Mr. President, respecting and upholding human rights is the obligation of all states and is enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Nowhere does the Charter arrogate the right to some to sit in judgment over others in carrying out this universal obligation. In that regard, we reject the politicization of this important issue and the application of double standards to victimize those who dare think and act independently of the self-anointed prefects of our time. We equally reject attempts to prescribe new rights that are contrary to our values, norms, traditions, and beliefs. We are not gays. Cooperation and respect for each other will advance the cause of human rights worldwide. Confrontation, vilification, and double standards will not. Mr. President, self-determination and independence are intrinsic and fundamental rights that should be enjoyed by all peoples everywhere without distinction. We are deeply concerned by the continued denial of this basic right to the Sahrawi people. We urge the United Nations to expeditiously finalize what must be done to conclude the decolonization of the Western Sahara. In the Middle East, the suffering of the Palestinian people continues unabated. What does Mr. Obama say about that? We reiterate our unwavering support to the just cause of the Palestinian people. Do we agree, Mr. United States? We also reiterate that lasting peace in the Middle East can only be achieved through negotiations to achieve a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. We are concerned by the increased in tensions in that region and urge the United Nations to assume its responsibility and bring an end to this senseless conflict. Mr. President, the promotion of gender equality is critical for the realization of the post-2015 development agenda. The African Union designated 2015, I quote, the year of the advancement of women empowerment and development towards Agenda 2063, unquote, in order to mobilize our individual and collective actions around this key issue. Gender equality and women empowerment are central to the achievement of human development, progress, and the elimination of the scourge of poverty and deprivation. We must continue to build upon the achievements that have been realized since the 1995 Fourth United Nations Conference on Women and the Beijing Declaration and its platform for action. Mr. President, the growing list of phenomena that neither respect nor know any borders makes it imperative that we mobilize all mechanisms of cooperation to effectively overcome them. Terrorism and extremist violence, communicable diseases such as HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, bird flu, Ebola, cannot be overcome single-handedly. The United Nations and its specialized agencies is the place and the mechanism for this indispensable and necessary cooperation. For some months now, we have watched heartbreaking and harrowing scenes of desperate refugees seeking to enter Europe in search of safety and shelter from the ravages of conflict in their own homelands. We have also read of the tragedy and loss of life in the Mediterranean. The majority of the affected people are from Syria or from other countries devastated by conflict and instability induced in great part by the destabilization policies of external forces. This tragic situation could have been avoided through the respect of the independence of other countries and non-interference in their internal affairs. In the case of Libya, we are witnessing the results of abusing the authority of the United Nations Security Council.
Yep, he's right about that. Look at Libya.
And ignoring the opinion of regional organizations, in this instance, the African Union, which are supposed to be the United Nations partners in the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, my country, Zimbabwe, is committed to a fair, just, and effective United Nations in which multilateralism, inclusivity, and transparency replace unilateralism, exclusion, and backroom deals. The Charter of the United Nations is built on the bedrock of the sovereign equality and independence of its members, without distinction as to their geographical size, economic might, or any other endowments or qualifications. We are deeply attached to these principles and call on other members of the United Nations to be similarly disposed. The United Nations was set up, among other purposes, to, and I quote, develop friendly relations amongst millions, unquote. Zimbabwe desires and is committed to nurturing friendly relations with other nations, but it cannot tolerate interference in its domestic affairs. We invite
That's an applause line.
other countries with which we may have differences, including the United States and the NATO powers. We invite them, if they have differences of whatever nature with us, to eschew threats, pressures, and punitive actions in favor of reconciliation, friendship, and dialogue. I therefore denounce in the strongest terms the illegal sanctions that are imposed on my country by the European Union and the USA, and call for their immediate and unconditional removal. We don't know what wrong we have done to the United States, and can it leave us free and independent to do our own thing, please? Once more, I put it on record that my country is desirous to live in harmony with all countries, big and small. We have peace in Zimbabwe just now. We don't want war. We don't want interference. We don't want to hear of regime change at all. The 70th anniversary of our organization has been marked, Mr. President, by the adoption of a far-reaching agenda which has the potential to drastically transform our world in all aspects. We are under no illusion about the challenges that lie ahead, but we are not discouraged either. Humankind has, over the epochs, demonstrated an immense tenacity in overcoming inertia and resistance to change. Now is our time to leave our own positive mark in the history of human development and interaction. Posterity, I repeat, expects no less from us. I thank you.
So anyway, we do want to eventually start the roll call, and then I'll start answering people's questions. That was a pretty good speech. It was much better in person. It wasn't as exciting as I remembered it, but I was in the hall and I was much more excited. But I did want to put on, I think, when I was in high school, 2005, they had the 10-year anniversary of the Million Man March. And it was the 10-year anniversary of the Million Man March. And it was right after Hurricane Katrina. And I remember watching the video of Minister Louis Farrakhan from that event. And it was very much an anti-imperialist rally where he hailed Cuba, he quoted Mao and Mao's Little Red Book, and he talked about China's role in Africa, which nobody was talking about back then. So I thought I might put on here some of the Farrakhan speech in Washington, D.C. at the 10-year anniversary of the Million Man March. I'm not going to put the whole thing on because we don't have time for that, but I thought I'd put some of that speech on. I have to go get my phone, which is in the other room. For some reason, I left it in the other room, and I need to have that with me. But I'm going to put some of Minister Farrakhan's. We'll start in the middle. But this is an anti-imperialist speech from a Black revolutionary leader. 10-year anniversary of the Million Man March, 2005. This was in Washington, D.C. So,
of those of us who need to see change, but they can't bring it, asking for H.R. 40 that has not even come out of committee yet, and other good legislation that will never see the light of day as long as the masses of the people are not organized to make government do what they don't have the moral correctness to do. You would make a mistake and waste valuable time thinking that there is moral correctness to serve the needs of the poor. That we must dispel. We must go back home and organize as never before. Let me give you a picture to take with you. Katrina grew to a number 12 tropical storm. And then she grew to what we say, because a lot of us are good talkers, but it will make a difference what we do. What we say can only become flesh if we go from this place and mobilize and organize street by street, block by block, house by house, so that we can accomplish that which we desire for the good of ourselves and our people. Now, it seems to me that I want to ask some questions, and I hope you will be ready to respond properly. I think that we should form a ministry of health and human service. Think about this. Since Jesus said, those who would be chief among you, let them be your servant, then we in leadership and our organizations are not to master the people, but to serve the people. So if such a disaster comes again, we need a ministry of health and human service to look after the health needs of the black, the brown, the Native American, and the poor. President Castro offered America over 1,500 doctors that spoke English to help with the tragedy of Katrina. Our government, very proud, did not accept those doctors. I think we should find a way to accept them, because our people need medical attention. If the government won't permit us to do that, we have a just cause to make them show a just cause why we who have hospitals closing in Washington and in cities across the country, why don't we need doctors? Now, President Castro has offered blacks in America 500 scholarships to go to Cuba to study medicine, with only one stipulation. And that stipulation is that we must bring that medical knowledge back and practice it in our own communities. Let's take Fidel Castro up on that offer, and I'm asking all of our doctors, when we go back home, let us form a ministry of health and human service that we can use to serve the needs of the black, the brown, the red, and the poor of this nation. We need a ministry of agriculture.
Yeah, let me just add that Ban Ki-moon said that the Cuban doctors, the Cuban medical school is the best medical school in the entire world. And this was a really big deal, that in front of a rally of 500,000 people, you had one of the most respected black leaders honoring Cuba and hailing their medical achievements. But he continues.
The black farmers are suffering. We need to unite our black farmers, make their land productive, and tie that land to the needs of the city. A ministry of agriculture. The Native Americans have the largest tracts of land, and they are willing, according to what I learned from Brother Bob Brown of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, they are willing to lease millions of acres if we are ready to go to work. To do what? As long as we keep our mouth in the kitchen of our enemy, we will never have good health. We must provide food for ourselves, because the merchants of death are feeding the American people, and they are tied to the pharmaceutical companies. They create disease on one hand through the improper raising of food and livestock, and then they make pills on the other hand to correct what they've created. We need a ministry of agriculture, because farming is the engine of every nation, and we need to provide for ourselves the things that we consume. And this will cause us to want to build supermarkets in every city. This will cause us to want to build canning factories and frozen food factories so we can take our product from the ground and can it, take our product from the ground and freeze it and put it into our own supermarkets. This we can do. It's not a big thing. It's just we need to think out of the box. A ministry of agriculture. We need a ministry of education. Let's unite all of our educators, because the Western system of education has run its course and is no longer worthy to hold our children or America's children. We are calling on our educators to provide a new educational paradigm. And if our educators form themselves into a ministry, a service, then we will be able to re-educate our children and others and make a productive people. We need a ministry of defense. Did you hear me? Look at all these young brothers. They are born soldiers, but they're in the wrong war. They're fighting a war in the streets of America against each other, or they're fighting in an unjust war overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq. We need to bring our boys home and put them into the ministry of defense so we can defend our communities rather than destroy our communities. Young men, come on and let's set up the ministry of defense in every city, in every town. We need a ministry of art and culture. We applaud the hip-hop community, the new leaders of young people all over the world, but I want the young generation of artists to know there's a bigger purpose than popping our fingers and shaking you know what. There's a bigger purpose for art and culture. Mao Zedong, on his long march, threw out Chiang Kai-shek, but he had 1 billion people whose lives he had to transform. Many of them were victims of opium, drugs, prostitution, like we are. But what Mao Zedong did, was he went to the cultural community and they accepted his idea. And then through song, through dance, through poetry, through drama, through documentaries, through movies, through books that were written, the idea of Mao Zedong became the idea of 1 billion people, and China became a world power on the base of the culture and the artistic community. If we had a ministry of art and culture in every city as we create this movement, we could say to our young people, what is the idea of the time? And are you reflecting that idea in your songs, in your dance, in your music? We need a ministry of trade and commerce. Do you think that a millions more movement shouldn't be involved in the development of Africa, the Caribbean, and Central America? Look, brothers and sisters, if we started feeding ourselves, look at the billions that we spend on food. But we need clothing and we need shelter. Look at our clothes, they're made somewhere else. Look at our shoes, our tennis shoes, they're made somewhere else. Suppose we pool some of the money that we spend foolishly. We could set up factories in Africa and in the Caribbean. That's a labor market that is a little cheaper than the labor here. But if they made our clothes, then we could open up clothing stores all over America, sell cheaper than the market, and then capture the market of the people, and all will come buying clothing from us because it's better and it's cheaper. Africa can be a source of shoes and clothing and lots of things that we might not be able to make in America successfully. So we need a ministry of trade and commerce that can link the struggle here with Africa and the Caribbean, Central and South America. We have a market of nearly 90 million black and brown. That's a huge market. Let's tap that market and we won't have to beg others. We'll be able to do it ourselves. We need a ministry of justice. We need to look at the conflicts in our own community. We don't need to go to our slave masters to solve our problems. We need to have a ministry of justice in every city that deals with the conflicts among us, that we solved it among ourselves through our ministries of justice. We need a ministry of information. We need to gather all the black newspapers, all black radio, black television, all magazines into a ministry of information, because if we have enough money in our ministry, we send our reporters wherever we want the truth. We do not wish to be subjected to the Associated Press or to Reuters or to UPI or to the news managed news of America and the world. We need to be where the action is so that our people will get correct information. We need a ministry of information. We need a ministry of science and technology. And lastly, we need a ministry that deals with the head, the spirit of our people, where we collect our spiritual leaders of Christianity and Islam and Judaism and all other religions and come up with the spiritual teaching that will transform our lives by renewing our minds, that we may destroy the Willie Lynch syndrome in black people in America and throughout the world forever. Now I'm asking you, would you agree that we should have a ministry of health and human service? Raise your hand, please. Uniting all our doctors and health professionals. Do you believe that we should have a ministry of agriculture? Raise your hands. Do you believe we should have a ministry of education, looking after the educational needs of our children and our people? Do you believe that we should have a ministry of defense? Let me see the hands. Don't be afraid. We have to do something to help ourselves. Do you believe that we should have a ministry of justice, a ministry of information, a ministry of science and technology, a ministry of art and culture, and lastly, a ministry that unites the spiritual community, that we may impart spiritual values to our people? All of you who agree with that, please let me see your hands from here all the way to the Washington Monument. Let me see those hands. Well, brothers and sisters, we need money. Now, I'll tell you what we can do to finance these ministries. Two things. One, all of you who are here and all of you who are watching by television, if you would go to www.
Anyhow, I'm sure the information he's giving is a little bit outdated, but that was a very, very powerful speech that I watched when I was in high school. And I thought that is, you know, he's quoting Mao, he's honoring Cuba. You know, I mean, that was very much, that's the socialist communist movement I believe in, right? And he's not even a communist, right? He's a black nationalist, he's a Muslim, but he identified even back then with China, the Chinese Revolution, with Cuba and everything that was going on. And I remember watching that speech as a high school student and thinking it was very exciting and revolutionary. And it's funny because the communist group I was talking to at the time didn't have a very high opinion of that speech. You know, they didn't like it. This was the Millions More March, the 10-year anniversary of the Million Man March that happened. So quite interesting. All right, folks. Well, listen, we've got 2 super chats that have come in so far. So, you know, I hope that people have more questions than that and such, but why don't we do the roll call? Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, Mark. Names and locations. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Nate in Chicago. Frank in Florida. Cleveland, Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Jeff in Delaware, Alex Rickel in Oregon, Bob in Troy, New York, Gonzalo in Argentina, April and Chris in Salt Lake City, Alex in Brazil, Scablands, Washington, Terry in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Simon in Oslo, Blake in Alabama, Mosin from Denver, Jenny in Cincinnati. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Tony in Salt Lake City, St. David's, Bermuda, Nick in Michigan, Ryan in Kansas City. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Let me call you out as I see you. Jonathan in North Carolina. Eve from Eden. Welcome, Eve. John McCarthy in Chicago. Welcome, John. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and, you know, names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us? Aaron Small from Washington. There you go. There we go. Anybody else? Names and locations. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Steve in Boston. Welcome, Steve. Good to have you with us, Mr. Steve. All right. Very good. Very, very good. Frankie from Sydney, Australia, the most racist country down under. Ha, 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 ha. All righty. Well, listen, folks, let me tell you what I did this afternoon. I did something this afternoon, which is that I wrote my document for the upcoming gathering of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. I wrote it, and it is about the socialist movement and the confusion in the modern socialist movement. You know, I wrote it. It needed to be written. And so I wrote it. It was kind of hanging over my head, and I wrote it, and I finished it this afternoon. I sent it in. So it is my document. The title of the document that I wrote is called "We Won't Fight Another Rich Man's War: Rejecting Trotskyism and Building an Anti-Imperialist Movement." So it's about 20 pages long. I'm not going to read it on here tonight. I'll probably read it on here in a future stream. We'll probably put it on the CPI website. No kidding. I had no idea. That is a really interesting bit of information. I will probably put that on the CPI website, but I had a good time writing it, and it needed to be written. And I basically just talked about anti-imperialism, talked about Trotsky. I talked about a lot of different things. I quoted a lot of different things. I talked about the history of the American Communist Movement, what we need to do, quoted Marx and all of that. And it was a piece that needed to be written. It's been a while, since I've just sat down and written a document like that. I'm glad I wrote it. I put it in the CPI chat groups for those of you that are members already. And, it's out there now. The document is there to basically give our perspective. I wrote that this afternoon. I want to remind people of something else, which is this, right? Slides, right? All right. Right. So a couple nights ago, I gave a talk on happiness. Do you guys remember that? Pursuit of Happiness. Oh, we got Lioness and Gia in Western New York. I gave a talk on happiness. So I have this other YouTube channel I made, smaller YouTube channel I made called Caleb Maupin Videos. And a lot of people have said that just doing the live streams every night makes it hard to revisit material or find me talking about certain topics. So I have this other YouTube channel I made. It's called Caleb Maupin Videos. So like the talk I did Saturday night about happiness, I put it on there, right? And it's on the other channel, right? So if you want to watch it or share it with a friend or something, you don't have to send them the whole stream. You can just send them the talk. There it is. There's the link, right? I will put it in the chat in Rumble as well. There you go. It's in the Rumble chat. And I made a nice thumbnail for it. And I want to remind people to go and subscribe to this other channel, right? Because this other channel, right, I stream on here every night and things get lost, right? And that they're going to, because I'm streaming every night. I'm filling up the notifications. I put out way too much content for one channel. I realize that people don't get the notifications, because I'm putting out videos every day. I did a podcast with Joe T. Brar and Harpel Brar, and I did that this morning, and that's probably why there's only 120 people watching right now. And that's because that messes with my notifications, right? YouTube doesn't give more than one notification a day. So if you want to keep up with my work and the highlights, I recommend you subscribe to this other channel, Caleb Maupin Videos. I will put that in the Rumble chat as well. Subscribe to this other channel for the highlights. Subscribe to this other channel. Please go and subscribe to this other channel. And no, Alex, I do not mind people clipping from my streams and posting them elsewhere. I have no objection to that whatsoever. If you clip from my... Good for you. I want people to do that because that means I'm on more than one channel. That means my message is getting out there. That means I might get through some of the censorship, etc. So if you feel like clipping, stuff that I do from this channel and putting it on another channel, please do that. Please do that. And I'm glad you think it's awesome, Gabby. We think you're awesome, and we love the work that you do. And I mean, but seriously, please, absolutely, please, please do that. So we want to get videos from here on as many channels as we possibly can. So yeah. We want to do that, now RT segments I can't put on YouTube anymore. They took down all the RT segments that I did on this channel. You got to be very careful with RT segments on YouTube. So, they don't like them. YouTube actually has a ban on RT content, which is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. They have no ban on CNN. They have no ban on BBC, right? Imperialists are fine, but anti-imperialist countries aren't, right? But there you go. Yeah, so I see a few more super chats have come in. I want to let people know super chats are not only a way to get me talking and give me something to talk about in the second half of the show. Super chats are also great because they support the work that I do and they help me pay my rent, which is too damn high. Got this home studio here in New York City. I have to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment. You know, my wife is not working at this time. Hopefully she finds a job soon. And so, you know, it helps, you know, the super chats, they really, really help. And it is appreciated. There's other ways to support the work that I do, joining the Patreon or, you know, buying some of the books that we've published. You know, we have our great book on the Houthis, which Alex Rickel is currently making the YouTube of. We've got our new textbook, the new CPI textbook, you know, that we just published, Out of the Movement to the Masses, which is now available, it's now gotten two ratings on Amazon and 1 review, you know, both 5 stars. Check it out. You know, we're always doing stuff, and, you know, CPI is separate from my own personal finances, right? If you know, send a super chat on this channel, you are supporting me directly. And if you join CPI, that money is only used for CPI stuff. I don't have access to those funds. So just be clear about that. But yeah, super chats help me do what I'm doing. So I see a few people have sent their super chats in. I'm going to respond to all of those. But I also wanted to mention that I filmed a video this afternoon. So today I went to the gym. I've been back at the gym in the last few days, which is good, right? I really needed to get back to the gym. Exercising does wonders for my mood, gets me in a better mood. I'm sweating every day at the gym and enjoying the nice weather, and it's been really, really important. But I did a video this afternoon, which I'm going to edit, and I'm probably going to post. It'll probably air tomorrow morning. Which is a polemic against one of the socialist groups that exists, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, because I've been critical of them for quite some time for some of the activism that they've done. But there was a twist with some of it that I had to comment on. As I was working on my paper that I wrote for the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, I came across this twist with Freedom Road Socialist Organization. I thought I have to comment on this. So I'm taking Peter Coffin's advice. I'm not going to post the video raw. Instead, I'm going to edit it heavily, and I'm going to put a lot of graphics in, and I'm going to try to make it concise, because you know how I am. I have the tendency to kind of ramble when I got the camera on. But I filmed it this afternoon here in my neighborhood, walking around as I left the gym. And I'm going to post it probably tomorrow morning. I'm going to add graphics and stuff, and I'll schedule it to air in the morning. And, you know, I hope that it ruffles some feathers, right? I mean, you know, in theory, you would think that I shouldn't be talking about all the socialist groups on YouTube the way I do. The thing is, all those groups absolutely hate me. I cannot go to Palestine rallies without these people threatening to beat me up, basically, and, you know, and calling me a white nationalist and all kinds of crap, right? So it's like, what do I gain from, you know, being nice to these people and not polemicizing against them, right? I mean, the socialist and communist movement, you know, the first thing they tell you when you join any socialist and communist group is there's this guy named Caleb who works for RT. He's bad. He's bad. And I know this for a fact. Like, you know, I know people who've tried to join CPUSA. The first question they get is, are you associated with that Caleb guy? He's bad. You know, and then you look at CPI, we've done 1,000 times more than most of these groups have ever done. And you wonder, oh, why do they hate us so much? Why do they hate me so much in particular? Oh, it's because they're grifters. Oh, it's because they're not doing all that we're doing, right? These are basically thieves that have been caught in their crime. You know, we're showing them up, right? And I talk about that in my essay. I talk about it in my video. So keep your eye out for that video that'll air tomorrow, and I'll be back tomorrow night. Well, actually, tomorrow night, no, I'm not going to be having a regular stream tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, I'm streaming with Doug Lane. Doug Lane is the guy who started Verso Publishing, and he's a friend of Peter Coffin's, and he defends the Frankfurt School, and he defends Western Marxism. So he and Peter Coffin and I are going to have a stream to talk about that. And it's going to be wild, and it's going to be on this channel, but it'll also be on Peter Coffin's channel. It'll also be on Doug Lane's channel. Let me get the time for you all on that. See, I'm doing a lot, right? I mean, who does this amount, right? I'm doing a lot, right? But it'll be at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. I will be on this channel chatting with Peter Coffin and Doug Lane. And we are going to talk about Western Marxism, the Frankfurt School, and all of that. And I will obviously be taking the negative position on that because I think that Western Marxism is a distortion of Marxism, etc. But Doug Lane, he released a video about 26 minutes long explaining why he supports quote unquote Western Marxism. And I watched it today and I thought, and I'm going to make it, I'm going to try to make it a friendly discussion. It's not going to be some big, ugly debate, but we do have contrary views on this topic. I think we're both frustrated by the same kinds of things. But we do have contrary views. I don't think the Frankfurt School is helpful. I don't think Adorno is helpful. I don't think any of that's helpful, right? I think we need to get back to genuine Marxism. We need to talk about overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit and this whole, oh, everyone's alienated, commodification, blah, blah. I mean, it's just an intellectual wank to cover up the fact that they're distorting and obscuring genuine Marxism. So it'll be an interesting conversation for sure. We'll see how it goes. We will just have to see how it goes. So that's tomorrow night. So I'm telling you, we got the video in the morning about Freedom Road, and then we got the talk tomorrow night about the Frankfurt School with Doug Lane. It's wild. We're doing so much, right? We are doing a lot, and this is just the streaming. And meanwhile, CPI, we're about to start our door knocker campaign, our outreach campaign. Elizabeth Young, our president, has been working very, very hard on, working very, very hard, on very good. He's been working very, very hard on the door knockers, the outreach that we're going to do, and then we got the event in DC that I'll be speaking at July 7th with the Koreans, the People's Democracy Party, and the anti-NATO mobilizations, and so many things are happening so quickly, right? We have to keep going. CPI is going to have a national convention in 2025. We are going to have another national convention in 2025. We are going to decide on the date of that convention soon so that we can start reserving the venue and we can start figuring out. Our goal is going to be to have 400 people at our national convention. Our last national convention that we did in Portland, we had 160 people there. So our goal will be to get 400 people to our national convention. That'll be in the Chicago area, Midwest. So we're going to set the date for that. And we got to figure out how to get people there and who to invite and what to do. I mean, it'll be in 2025. So it's very, very exciting. I'm very excited about it. And we're going to have a board meeting soon and figure that out. So a lot of things are going on. A lot of great things are happening. It's frustrating. These are frustrating times. Why couldn't they just accept the peace deal that Putin gave, right? The war could be over, but they don't want the war to be over. They want to keep causing trouble, right? Why at this point, why can't they just drop the charges against Uhuru already? Why don't they just drop the charges, right? I mean, there's many frustrating things in this world, but we have to keep organizing. We have to keep doing our best because that's what it means to be a human being, is to struggle against the forces of injustice, to try and make tomorrow better than today. That is the meaning of humanity. So we really have no choice but to struggle. Life is struggle, and we are alive. And as long as we are alive, we will keep struggling. So if anyone can send any more super chats or Rumble rants, they would be appreciated. And I'm going to start answering people's questions. All right. First one is from Chris Shipley. He says, China and Russia and Africa united to lead the future. Yes. Yes. Economic development, jobs, schools, and healthcare, growth, not degrowth, not war and destruction. Africa is the future. And that's why I'm so excited about Zimbabwe and their space program. And, right. Yeah, so there you go. So, okay. All right. I see the super chats. More super chats are better, but, China and Russia and, they are the future and very exciting things happening. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit distracted, but I'm going to focus now. So next question, is the draft really back? That's not a good sign. Well, so the military draft, my understanding is that the military draft, it was kind of kept on the books after World War II. And they drafted people to fight in the Korean War. And throughout the 50s and 60s, they were drafting people to go into the U.S. military, but you could get what was called a college deferment. So you wouldn't have to fight. Or if you were married and had children, or you were in, if you were in college or you had kids or whatever, you could get a deferment. But they did have the military draft, and it was just everybody pretty much. And then they changed it during the Vietnam War because they realized that it's not fair. That some people go to college and some people go to the military. So then they started making it about your birthday. And even if you were in college, if your birthday, you got drafted to go into the military. And so then after the Vietnam War, they ended the military draft, and it was Richard Nixon who ended the military draft. But then it was Jimmy Carter who brought back draft registration. So under Jimmy Carter, they said because the Soviet Union had gone into Afghanistan, they made it sound like the Soviet Union was invading Afghanistan, even though the Soviet Union was going in to defend the Afghan government from a CIA-led, anti-communist uprising led by Osama bin Laden, right? The Soviet Union was going there to fight bin Laden at the request of the Afghan government. They made it sound like the Soviet Union was invading Afghanistan. The Carter administration boycotted the 1980 Olympics. And on top of that, they reinstituted draft registration, which is every male in the United States, when you're 18, you have to register for the draft. And it's like, takes 2 seconds. It's like name, birthday, the end. I mean, it's really, really an easy thing. I did it when I turned 18. You just fill out some paperwork. I mean, and it's like, boom, it takes 2 seconds. There were some people who refused to do it. There were a lot of like pacifists, anti-war kind of people that refused to register for the draft. Not really anymore. And there's no criminal penalty if you don't register, but you can't get student loans. There's certain things you can't do. I don't think you can get a driver's license. Like if you don't, as a male, once you turn 18, if you don't register for the draft, they do something to you. But as far as actually conscripting people and making them go into the military in the United States, unless we have World War III, unless there's an all-out war with Russia, I don't think that's likely to happen. I don't think it's likely to occur. Now, it's in Britain, I guess there's some talk of bringing back a military draft, and that surprises me. Let me just put it that way. I find it very surprising. Now, for a long time, the Democrats have been floating this idea called National Service Initiative. And on the surface of it, it sounds great, right? That young people, when they turn 18, before they go to college, they should either go into the military or they should go and engage in some community national service. They should, go clean up the parks, or they should go help teach in a low income area or something. It sounds really great, right? Isn't that great? Don't we want young people to, go out and be good, all great people? Don't we want that? But actually what it is, it's an austerity measure, because what your national service would be is you'd either go into the military or you would do the work of a government employee for free, right? Just like Teach for America. Remember that? That was Barack Obama's great program. Oh boy, we're going to cancel this. I'm Barack Obama. We're going to cancel the student debt of the young people. We're going to set up Teach for America. And so young people, if you go and teach in a low-income area for a few years, look, then we'll cancel your student debt. It's going to be a great program. Great. Well, what they don't tell you is that the Teach for America program, you don't get union wages. And they send you there to take the job away from a union teacher who gets full benefits. Teach for America was not a community service program. It was a union busting program. Right. And it was mainly the rural South. It was Black areas of the South that got Teach for America teachers. Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. And these are the communities where those good paying jobs of teachers who get healthcare benefits and, and get decent pay and all of that are really important. And what they would do is, you know, some suburban white kid who wants to be a teacher, right, in you know, Boston or Chicago or whatever, you know, he doesn't want to pay for college, so he wants his college to be paid for, so he signs up for Teach for America. And then they send him on a plane down to, you know, rural Georgia or rural Alabama or rural Mississippi to take the job away from a black person in the area who, you know, who could really benefit the community by, you know, having benefits and, you know, and having such things. And it was an awful program. It was an awful program, and it remains an awful program, right? They need good pay, and while they're down there teaching, they're getting poverty wages to do it. They're not getting wages, and they're not getting union representation, and they get paid almost nothing to teach in a rural area for a couple years while they're living off their parents. Basically, their parents are supplementing their income, and they're living in a very, very impoverished area, taking the job away from a local teacher who would get full benefits. It's an awful program. It's an austerity program. And there's many examples of this, right? And you know, National Service Initiative, right? You would basically, it'd be a way to get young Americans who don't want to go in the army to be postal workers for free, to be sanitation workers for free. I mean, it's an awful austerity program, but they dress it up as, oh, volunteer and help the nation or something like that. It's sinister, right? So I from what I understand, they're like on the brink of implementing something like National Service Initiative in the UK, and it's union busting, and it's austerity, and it's bad, right? Look, when I was in college, and it's so sad because I mean they're not wrong, but it sucks. I remember before we left college, we had to do a lot of like how to get a job classes. And one of the things they told us is, oh, if you really want to work someplace, go and work there for free for a year as an unpaid intern and make friends, and then they'll probably hire you. Now think about that. And that's insanity. Oh, if you want to work someplace, find a place you want to work, and after college, go work there for free as an unpaid intern for a year, and then you'll make some friends, and then maybe they'll hire you. I mean, that's insanity, but it's true. It's absolutely true, though. In fact, I know a lot of people, that's how they got the job they have now, and especially if you want to work in the like liberal nonprofit sector and all of that. It's insanity. It is complete and utter insanity. And that's where we're at, right? You know, if you want a good paying job, and this is when they talk about the managerial class and all of that. And this is also how they keep people from dissenting, right? Because those kind of, you know, office jobs, those nonprofit jobs tend to be places that are full of cancel culture. And yeah, it's really awful what young people have to go through these days. So yeah, National Service Initiative, thumbs down, right? Draft military conscription, thumbs down. Not for it. Not for it. All right. Now, Farrakhan's granddaughter studied medicine on one of those Cuban scholarships. That is awesome. That's John McCarthy who says that. That is awesome, number one. That's a great thing. And Farrakhan's family are amazing in so many ways. And I want to I saw somebody in the chat saying the whole, did Farrakhan kill Malcolm X thing? First of all, Farrakhan did not personally kill Malcolm X. We know who did, right? And there was a big divide between the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. Malcolm X was the spokesperson of the Nation of Islam, and he got to be more and more famous, and there was a rivalry between the other ministers in the Nation of Islam. And eventually he became convinced that Elijah Muhammad had done something improper. The Nation of Islam maintains that Elijah Muhammad was simply practicing polygamy, which is which is part of the Islamic tradition, right? They maintain he was not doing something improper. He was merely practicing polygamy, and because that's illegal, and it was like enforced. Nowadays, people have polyamorous relationships, whatever, but back in those days, you know, especially if you're the leader of a black liberation organization and you're practicing polygamy in the 50s, you're going to prison. And so, but, the Nation of Islam, they argue that Elijah Muhammad was practicing polygamy. There's a whole speech that Minister Farrakhan gave on the whole Malcolm X affair that is actually very, very good. I would recommend going and listening to it. I actually learned a lot from it on a number of levels about like organizing and public relations and all kinds of things. But the important thing to remember, right? And this sounds too insane to be true. Okay. And this really shows you how awesome Farrakhan is. Okay. You look this up. This is too nuts to be true, but it happened. Malcolm X's daughter was arrested for trying to kill Minister Farrakhan. Right? And what happened was that her boyfriend, the man who was her boyfriend, was actually an FBI informant. The FBI sent an informant to date Malcolm X's daughter. Okay? And Malcolm X's daughter, she's traumatized. Of course, she saw her father shot dead, brutally murdered in front of her eyes. She was in the audience. She thought her dad was going to give a speech, and then he was brutally murdered in front of her eyes. And so she's traumatized. How could anyone not have mental illness? How could anyone not, be scarred by such an incident? And she's traumatized. So the FBI sent a fucking informant to be her boyfriend. And the fucking informant talked to her over and over again. Hey, have you ever thought about killing Farrakhan? That Farrakhan guy, he's restarting the Nation of Islam. They're the ones who killed your dad. And this fucking informant got her on a mic saying that she was thinking about killing Farrakhan, planning to kill Farrakhan or whatever. So she was arrested for conspiracy to kill Minister Farrakhan. You can't make this up. Right? It's insanity. This is how evil the ruling class is. People say to me, "Oh, Caleb, how can you claim they've come after you?" This is the kind of shit they do. Like, it's nuts. They got her on a hot mic, right? Saying that she wanted to kill Farrakhan. They arrested her for conspiring to kill Minister Farrakhan. And you know who the biggest supporter of her was when that happened? Demanding the government drop the charges against her? Minister Farrakhan. Minister Farrakhan went to all her court dates with her and said, this woman, maybe she needs some psychological help, but I don't want her to go to jail. I don't feel threatened by her. And Minister Farrakhan supported Malcolm X's daughter after the government entrapped her for trying to kill him. Okay? And at that point, there was reconciliation between Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, and Minister Farrakhan. And that's when the reconciliation happened. You look at that story, that there's so much crazy in that story. I mean, that's how evil our government is, right? That they would actually go out of their way to frame up, the daughter of Malcolm X and entrap her for trying to kill, it's just nuts. But yeah, Quabila Shabazz was charged for trying to hire a hitman to kill Minister Farrakhan. And you look at the details of that case, it is nuts, right? Go and read about Quabila Shabazz, the second daughter of Malcolm X, and how the U.S. government entrapped her, right? Entrapped her and tried to frame her, and how Minister Farrakhan supported her and went to all of her court date hearings and ultimately got the government to drop the charges against her. He said, I'm the victim, right? And I'm saying drop the charges. Maybe she needs some psychological help. She's been through enough. And the Black community has been so divided and scarred by the death of Malcolm X. And Minister Farrakhan spoke up and just raised from the heavens, let her go. And she ultimately got a plea deal that enabled her to get drug treatment and all of that, right? And that is when Betty Shabazz and Minister Farrakhan reconciled. And that story tells me what a big person Minister Farrakhan is, right? Because everywhere Farrakhan goes, they say, did you kill Malcolm X? You're the guy who killed Malcolm X. I bet you killed Malcolm X. He had nothing to do with killing Malcolm X, right? And I mean, we know who did, right? It was the Nation of Islam certainly had a beef with Malcolm X, you know, and they certainly felt he deserved it at the time. But Minister Farrakhan himself did not kill Malcolm X. But that's the slur that's been out there. They've been putting out there. When they made the movie Malcolm X, the New York Times ran an article about the arch nemesis of Malcolm X, Minister Farrakhan, even though Malcolm X trained Minister Farrakhan and taught Minister Farrakhan everything that he knows, right? I mean, he learned to be a speaker from Malcolm X. So, the whole thing is just ridiculous. But then when they framed up Kabila Shabazz, Malcolm X's daughter, for trying to kill Farrakhan, Farrakhan stepped up and supported her. Such a heroic thing to do, right? Such a heroic and moral thing to do. Go and read about the case of Kabila Shabazz, and that shows you how much of a hero Minister Farrakhan is and how much of a big person. Can you imagine if somebody tried to kill you or is arrested for trying to hire a hitman to kill you, right? And your whole life you've been smeared, as the guy who killed this great black leader, and yet he still had the bigness of heart to go to all of her court dates and say, drop the charges, and to reconcile with Betty Shabazz. That whole incident tells you what a great man Minister Farrakhan is. I look up to Minister Farrakhan. I am in awe of Minister Farrakhan. And you can go over the various things he said over the years on various issues. I admire Minister Farrakhan. I admire him. I do. So there you go. All right. Okay. All right. I'm just scrolling down here. Please debunk this guy, Alternate History Hub video. What if the USSR was never formed? Okay. All righty. I'll take a look at it. What if the USSR was never formed? Okay. What if the USSR was never formed? Oh my God. Right. First of all, alternate history, even the premise there, and I'll have to watch the video off the stream in order to react to it, but even the premise of it, right? There's no such thing as a time machine. You can't go back in time and change things. And every event that happens is intrinsically tied up with so many other events. Talk about the butterfly effect, right? It's intrinsically tied in with so many other events, right? What if the USSR was never formed? Do you know how many things would have to have changed in world history for something as big as the Soviet Union to have never existed? Like, you can't really do that. And you're going to say, oh, well, what if this had happened? I mean, you're purely speaking hypothetically, right? So, I mean, anyone who starts from that premise, I mean, it's just, they're not in the realm of reality. Can you see a time, I'm scrolling down here, Funky Lollipop, and shout out to Funky Lollipop or Briggy. Can you see a time where African countries that share a border are standing together to fight an imperialist invasion? Absolutely, I can. Absolutely, I can. And in fact, we've seen in West Africa the wave of nationalist, governments that have come into power. And that's not just one country. It's like the whole region, Niger and Gabon, and a number of African countries, aligning with Russia and China, kicking out the United Nations and all of that. And that was regional. It wasn't, just on the basis of one country. So yes, I can see that happening. I mean, Southern Africa, is where you'll find, all of those governments are from anti-colonial revolutionary movements. And and Africa is the future because Africans are having kids. That's what Gaddafi pointed out. Africans are having kids, and Africa has a huge amount of natural resources, and Africa is ready to grow, and Africa is the future. And I'm telling you, Africa is the future. So there you go. All righty. We're going to keep answering super chats. RFK let me down. What are your thoughts on him? I am starting to think that the RFK campaign is some kind of controlled opposition experiment. That's what I'm convinced. But we'll see. I mean, they are letting him on the debate stage, right? And now that they're letting him on the debate stage, I don't even know what to think. Let's see what he says on the debate stage. I must say that, you know, right now there's a lot of energy in the ruling class to try and they realize that there's a big section of the population on the left, on the right, that are against the American government and against the American establishment, right? There's a lot of libertarians out there. There's a lot of Trumper, QAnon people out there. There's a lot of, far left people out there. There's a lot of people that watch RT out there. There's a lot of people that are pro-Palestine out there. The amount of Americans that don't trust the U.S. ruling class, that think that JFK was killed by the American government, possibly RFK as well, is not small. And the amount of people who question the vaccine is massive. And, there's more dissent right now than ever before. Now, that is because of the economy. It's because of the economy. The economic base of U.S. society is falling apart. And when people don't have jobs in schools and they're frustrated with their living conditions, that's how their minds open up, right? This is class consciousness. But right now, there's a big effort to try and control dissident sentiments. It's going on. And it is a massive operation. And, it's funny. I wrote my book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism, basically alleging that BreadTube, the big socialist YouTube channels, that they were some kind of attempt to deprogram and control the young people that are getting interested in communism. And I based that on the fact that the head deprogrammer, the guy who kidnapped people and did forcible deprogrammings for the Moonies, Steve Hassan, is an advisor to BreadTube. Right? And I that's what I said. I know people brought me information, can't share who, brought me information showing me that Steve Hassan is behind the scenes an advisor to BreadTube. And that BreadTube, part of what they're doing is they're trying to deprogram and de-radicalize right-wingers and young people that get into right-wing stuff by playing video games, Gamergate and all of that. And also to try and control socialism so that, we don't become real anti-imperialists and communists. We just become like woke liberals. I just had that little bit of information and I wrote a book about it. And that my book sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies. At least 800 copies of that book have sold. And then everything I wrote was proven to be completely true. And then Gray Zone revealed that Abigail Thorne, one of the main BreadTubers, is on the payroll of British intelligence. And on top of that, it was then, revealed. Then one of the guys who I talk about in my book, Caleb Kane, he came out, and I love this. He's like, well, Caleb's totally wrong. It's not just Steve Hassan. There's this whole thing called exiting extremism. There's this whole, de-radicalization program that's been set up that is tied to the FBI and stuff. So Caleb doesn't know what he's talking about. And you go listen to Caleb Kane. He's trying to debunk me. And he spills the beans that like, oh, yeah, well, Steve Hassan, I only met him once because the program is way bigger than him. It's this whole thing set up by the FBI that includes all kinds of people. And I'm just like, oh, okay, you're right. I only saw the tip of the iceberg. It's not just one guy. I only had information on one guy. And Caleb Kane thinks he's debunking me by revealing that it's a whole huge network of people that he was in touch with as he was de-radicalized from being alt-right, that are involved with BreadTube, that are involved with all of that. And Steve Hassan is part of that. And that's how he got connected with Steve Hassan. So, when I wrote BreadTube Serves Imperialism, like I had one piece of information and I couldn't even reveal the source and it wasn't good. And I was so much more right than I could have ever fucking imagined. It was like, whoa, I was really, really, really right. And what I was pointing to is that quote unquote de-radicalization, combating extremism and stuff is a huge industry right now. The ruling class of this government, the deep state, has poured billions of dollars into this. They are really afraid of events like January 6th. They are really afraid of they just do not want there to be some kind of genuine revolutionary movement. And there are many different angles, and there are many different currents of their de-radicalization. This is what's so interesting. Some of the groups, some of the de-radicalization money is only focused on preventing violence, right? Some of them are just about opposing violence. So, they wouldn't target me because I oppose violence. And in fact, they might even boost me because I don't advocate violence and I oppose violence, right? However, some of the program is focused on opposing Russia and China and opposing disinformation, which means the truth as told by Russian and Chinese media. So those folks would probably be focused on smearing me and trying to discredit me, etc. Some of the programs are opposing what they call totalitarian ideologies like communism and fascism. Some of the programs are about opposing anti-Semitism or racial, and that there is just so much money at this point being poured into the de-radicalization network and the de-radicalization programs that at this point, I mean, it's a widely inclusive program, okay? And I am convinced, based on some of what I have observed, that an aspect of the RFK campaign is some kind, that there is some kind of de-radicalization effort involved in the RFK campaign, right? That he wouldn't be able to do what he is doing if there wasn't some, and that RFK is very much trying to embed himself in dissident circles, befriend people in dissident circles, keep track of people in different dissident circles. So I'm suspicious, but you know what? I don't care, right? And honestly, until the Israel thing heated up the way it did, I was willing to stomach some of the bad things that RFK said because he was saying such good things about Russia and stuff. But then the way he started talking about Israel, which is just, I mean, it's not just supporting Israel. It's like despicable, right? It made me wonder, but I don't know, right? And the way RFK just kind of suddenly inserted himself into every dissident community and every dissident circle everywhere. And I am convinced that, again, the government is trying to track us. We do know at this point that one thing that they are doing in many different, in at least two radical communities, and I talked about this here, is that they create internet entertainers whose job it is to keep people away from any real organization, keep people away from any real organizing effort, and suck people into an internet bubble, right? And I went off on a previous stream about who I think is doing that. Nick Fuentes is clearly doing that for white nationalists, which is a good thing because white nationalists are awful, right? I don't want there to be some kind of mass white nationalist movement in America. So to the degree that Nick Fuentes is stopping that, that's a good thing. But there are certain other people that are basically carbon copies of Nick Fuentes that are implanted to try and mess with our community. And I think you all know who I'm talking about. And, it's the same kind of program that Nick Fuentes is running. And I think Nick Fuentes is even friends with them, from what I understand, and it's about, creating hostility to anyone who's doing real organizing. It's about sucking people into kind of an internet bubble. It's about getting people to be as antisocial and rude as they possibly can be. And it's also about making them not ideological. Right? Nick Fuentes is a racist. Nick Fuentes is anti-Semitic. Nick Fuentes is racist to black people. But Nick Fuentes is not an ideological white nationalist. Right? He's not an ideological fascist. He's never read Julius Evola. He's never read any of the far right stuff. He doesn't know anything about, Gentile and the origin of fascism. He couldn't tell you any of that. He doesn't care about any of that, right? He's just a dumb used car salesman who insults people on the internet and uses slurs and offensive language. And most people, if they ever encounter somebody who's calling people ethnic and racial slurs or calling people anti-LGBT slurs, they don't like them. Right. But if you're a young man in their 20s or younger who gets sucked into their internet bubble, you start acting that way and calling people such slurs. And you think it's just so cool, but it's not. It's actually, most people just hate you. But anyway, I've said it too much about that. I talked about that on previous streams. Scrolling up, because we're going to show them on the streams. We're going to show the super chats because we don't have that far to scroll up. But yeah, I'm convinced that RFK's campaign, there's an element of that's my thought, is that there's an element of, there's some de-radicalization, anti-extremism, monitoring extremism, money and intelligence work behind it. And it is what it is. Someone talked about me on Jimmy Dore. No shocker. I have been on Jimmy Dore's show before. And I actually want to show you a clip from that since you brought it up, because Jimmy Dore is awesome. I've met Jimmy Dore many times. I've been on his show before. I love Jimmy Dore, and a lot of people who like Jimmy Dore like me, but a lot of people who like Jimmy Dore don't like me, right? And Jimmy Dore, that's one good thing about him, is he has friends in different places. So this is me. This is one of the best moments I had with Jimmy Dore. Working people to realize their own economic interests. And they have a word for that, right? If you want to raise the minimum wage, or if you want Medicare for all, you're a class reductionist. That's their term.
What?
Immediately they scream class reduction.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I don't know what it means, but if you want to fight for economic justice, you're a bad person. You're a class reductionist. And they have all kinds of lists of accusatory names they throw at people. And one of them is if you believe in economic justice, if you raise economic issues, you don't focus on the culture war, you're a class reductionist.
That is that's well, what I enjoy telling people is that when you hear people who say they're on the left in the United States, and they say things like, "Oh, we have to organize along class lines," right? We have to organize. You'll even hear the knuckleheads at TYT say this thing. We have to organize along class lines. They have no idea what that means. And if they do, they're just blatantly lying, because they do not mean what organizing along class lines means. Is that you organized with people in the same class, meaning whatever political stripe they come from, meaning if they're a libertarian or a socialist or a Republican or a boogaloo boy or a socialist or a communist, all those people have to come together. That's called, so it's just like when you organize in a union. I've been in unions my whole life. The way you don't organize a union is you don't go to the shop floor and go, who here's a boogaloo boy? You're out. Who here's a Proud Boy? You're out. Who's here as a libertarian gun nut? You're out. Who here's a Trump voter? You're out. Okay, who's left? Now we're going to organize against the man with you people. That's not how organizing works. It's only powerful when you get people who totally disagree with each other to agree on something. And that's when change really happens. Like when we had the Medicare for All march this summer, people were complaining that there's some right-wingers on stage. That's because Medicare for All means Medicare for all, and that's when you can actually pressure government, when you have people from all different stripes of politics combined and converging on one idea. That's how you make something happen, which is why the Black Panthers teamed up with the KKK in Las Vegas to get their welfare checks back. That's why they killed Fred Hampton. Why did they kill Fred Hampton? Because he was organizing black people? No, because Fred Hampton was organizing Southern racist whites with black people in Chicago, and they were realizing they had more in common than they had separate and different, and that's when they killed Fred Hampton. So that's the thing that they can't have, and that's what people who say we have to organize along class lines, when you hear somebody at the Young Turks say we have to organize, they don't mean it for a second. They hate people who are in the different political party than they are and in the same class. They hate those people, and in fact their business model is built on clickbait, hating those people. So would you like to comment on that?
Well, sure. And, the biggest cure in U.S. history for racism has always been the picket line. When black workers and white workers see they have a common economic interest, this breaks down the divisions. It was the CIO and in their effort to spread unions, it was that broke down the racial divisions. When the Communist Party in the 1930s was going into the auto plants and the steel mills, often they would break down historical divisions among workers and build multiracial unions. You hear about in the South when the sharecroppers were organizing, how William Z. Foster and Gus Hall would go to a town and give a speech, and how the white workers would rip up their Ku Klux Klan cards and say, my enemy isn't the black people, my enemy is the plantation owners and the capitalists and the big bankers. That is how you overcome racism, is getting people to see they have something in common, bringing people together. It's through those kinds of struggles that you can break down inequality, and that people can see that they have more in common. And by creating artificial divisions ahead of time and discouraging economic struggle, you're setting the stage for the opposite. You're setting the stage for basically whipsawing the population. There's an old device they called a whipsaw, right? And it's like a two-man saw. And when one guy's pushing, the other guy's pulling. And when one guy's pulling, the other guy's pushing. That's kind of what they're doing right now in the United States. They want one section of the population to think that they can only gain at the expense of another section of the population. And then they go to the other section and say, oh, you can only gain at the expense of the other one. And we've got working people all throughout the United States pushing and pulling on each other in a culture war. And we're all getting poorer. And their agenda of creating a low-wage police state marches ahead. And we got to have class solidarity. We got to go against it. Fred Hampton is a great example of that kind of work.
Low-wage police state. That is exactly what they're pushing for. Well, anyway, great work on this. BreadTube Serves Imperialism, Examining the New Brand of Internet Pseudo-Socialism by Caleb Maupin. It's available at Amazon and all the places where you can buy. But do you have a website?
Sure. I'm at calebmaupin.com, but you can also check out, I work with a think tank called the Center for Political Innovation. We're at cpiusa.org. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. Jimmy Dore is awesome. I love Jimmy Dore. And, I'm not concerned. I'm really not concerned about people being silly. You know what I mean? I'm sure there will probably come a time the rotation will get to the point that I'm on Dore's show again. So I'm not losing sleep over anything that was said by somebody. And I will say, if libertarians are mad at me, Angela McCurdle of the Libertarian Party, I'm nothing but friendly with her. And she and I had a very friendly stream you can also watch. So I want to get along with libertarians. I don't want to fight with libertarians. Dave Smith, the libertarian, is angry with me. And the main reason he's angry with me is because I just made good points in an argument with him. Right. I mean, how dare I? I'm sorry, but Pasta hosted a panel with me and Dave Smith and Spike Cohen. And Dave Smith ran away because I was making good points. And he lost it and he ran away in cowardice. And ever since then, he's been tweeting angry things at me and all of that. So, if Dave Smith and his, internet fans are pouting about me making good points in an argument, there are times I wish I was dumber, because I think people like that would like me more, right? If I was just stupid enough, I could, people would like me more, and I wouldn't make as many enemies. But and if I was just stupid enough, I could go along with a lot of things that I see in the world that are wrong. But I'm sorry, I do see a lot of things in the world that are wrong, and I'm not just going to not say them. You know what I mean? And that, look, I was brought on there to represent the communist perspective to Dave Smith, and I did a good job, and he ran away like a coward. And ever since then, he has been, tantruming about me being mad at him. I don't harbor any resentment toward Dave Smith. I mean, he's just whatever. He's a libertarian. We agree on opposing war. We agree on opposing the low-wage police state, so I'm sorry I wasn't stupid enough to not win the argument with him as effectively as I did. But whatever. I don't lose any sleep over it. I just focus on doing good. So next question. Scrolling up. Right? How do you live in NYC? Well, that's a good question, Gabby. I have to live here for my job. My job for RT is I cover the United Nations, which I don't know where people get this from. Every time somebody mentions me on the internet and they're like, and he got fired from RT. I never got fired from RT. I have worked for RT since March of 2016, nonstop. I don't know where people get this, but RT America closed down. And then I get people that, well, never mind. I'm not even going to say the second thing, but like, I have not ever stopped working for RT. RT America shut down, but I was never for RT America. I worked for RT International for Moscow, and I've been reporting for them ever since. I don't know where people get this, right? And I've heard people say, oh, Caleb, we saw you back on air on RT. When have I not been on air on RT? I'd stopped streaming for a couple months in 2022. And I was still on RT like every day during that time, right? It's just, these people just make this up. But I work at RT, and that's, it's a good paying job. I pay my bills, but I have to live in a city where it's pretty damn expensive to live. And I work from home, but I need to be able to cover the United Nations. I need to meet my cameraman in New York City to cover news stories and stuff. So it's very expensive to live here. And I'm at the point where, the reason I came here, when I first came to New York City, there was this energy to the city that kept me here. But that energy really, since the pandemic, is not here, right? I mean, city that never sleeps, my butt, I guess if I moved somewhere else, I'd have to get a driver's license. So, I'd have to have a car, and that's kind of a bummer, but honestly, if I don't know if I would stay here if it wasn't for my job. I mean, I don't know if I could afford it. I mean, I can barely afford it with my job. I mean, my rent is insane. But I don't know if you were asking about the financial aspect or just how do I live here. But honestly, I got to tell you, I really miss having the RT studio. I'll be frank and honest about that, right? Maybe it was annoying to have to, wake up every day at a certain time and put on my suit and tie and go to work. But compared to working from home, I had much more of a life. Could go meet people. I could, I saw people. I went on the subway every day and all of that. Now I work from home. And I got to tell you, working from home is very, very lonely. It's very, very, very lonely. That's why going to church has become a big part of my life. I'm not a member of the church that I go to, and they don't agree with me, and I don't agree with them on a lot of things, but it's a big part of my life. And, going to their church every Sunday morning and going to their Bible study classes, and stuff like that really means a lot to me. And it's funny because I've had people complain to me about the church that I go to. Oh, how can you go to this church? And I'm thinking, well, I can't go to any communist or socialist space because I'm not stupid enough. Right. If I showed up at the People's Forum, I might get beaten up every time I go to try and cover a Palestine rally. These fucking socialists who I agree with on a lot of things want to murder me because they read something on the internet. So, we tried to organize for peace on the Korean Peninsula with the Socialist Korea group, and they told us they didn't want us there. They didn't feel safe with us in their presence. So, if people want to give me shit about the church I attend, they need to really think about that, right? They need to really, really think about what they're saying because, the church I attend, I'm very proud to attend it. I like the people there. We get along despite the fact that we disagree. They're very dedicated and honest people, and they've been smeared and harassed and mistreated over the years, just like I have. And, I'm not a member. I don't, follow their teaching necessarily, but I'm learning and I'm open to it. And you know what? I can go there and no one threatens to beat me up. Imagine that. I can go there and no one wants to tell me I'm a bad person. Because something that somebody tweeted or they read on the internet about me. You know what I'm saying? And I can go there and no one thinks I'm inferior because I grew up in a small town in Ohio and I went to church as a kid, So I appreciate going there. And, if there were events that I could go to in New York City that were anti-imperialist and all that, I would go to them. And I still meet with comrades very regularly, etc. But, let's just be honest about all these things, right? I mean, the left is not a safe place for people that are genuinely anti-imperialist. The Party of Socialism and Liberation thinks that if you don't have Trump derangement syndrome, that you're the same as a Nazi, right? And they pretty much run all the anti-imperialist protests in New York City. And their members have been oriented that if you're part of CPI, or you support Russia and Ukraine, or watch Jimmy Dore's show, that you're a white nationalist, which according to their ideology means you deserve to be beaten up and killed. PSL is a very, very evil organization, right? And and so let's just be honest about what PSL is. PSL, they go out of their way to try and marginalize and threaten people who actually believe in anti-imperialism so they can continue to run this charade for the Democratic Party. It's very evil. Anyway, let's not focus on the bad. Let's focus on the good. Let's focus on the good. All righty. Scrolling up. I saw Gabby made a couple very funny super chats. But yeah, New York City, I'm working out now. I'm going to the gym. I did that today. That was great. So there we go. So it's a way of forcing crap teachers onto students hungry for knowledge. And if those students don't like it, Kamala Harris locks up their parents. Well, Phil, yeah, I guess. I mean, Kamala Harris bragged about jailing parents for truancy. So, yeah, I mean, that Teach for America program that Barack Obama did was nothing but a union busting program. But there we go. There we go. Yeah, there we go. All right. All right. Scrolling up, scrolling up, scrolling up, scrolling up. Just want to answer people's questions. Simon says, have to go, keep up the great work. And he said it twice. And thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. I know you're up in Norway, and you're an anti-imperialist up in Norway where it's illegal to watch RT, where they're putting people in jail and stuff. And so keep up the good work that you're doing. These are hard times for those of us who know the truth, but we will prevail in the end. Russia's going to come out of this conflict stronger than ever before because they weren't vanquished, and the imperialists are going to come out of this weakened and humiliated. So there you go. Can't wait to see Trump win because shitlibs will cry. Yeah, I mean, Trump says a lot of awful things about Israel and Palestine and all of that, but I mean, it would be worth it just for that, wouldn't it? Because Biden has been running this country for so long. And I mean, he's been running the country for the last 4 years, and it's only gotten worse. This is the revolution they all fought for. Trump was just so bad, it was intolerable. And all the things that were supposed to happen under Trump happened under Biden, right? They always say, well, if Trump gets back in, he's going to jail his opposition. Well, Trump didn't jail his opposition when he was in office. But Biden got in, and not only did he jail loads of Trump supporters for January 6th, ridiculous sentences for strolling into the Capitol, he also has prosecuted the Uhuru movement. Believe it or not, he prosecuted the Uhuru movement. So many Trump supporters have been prosecuted by Biden. And so we're supposed to it's a hypothetical. Maybe if Trump gets reelected, he will actually prosecute Biden supporters. And it's like, you look at this, they're prosecuting Trump. They prosecuted hundreds of January 6th people, gave them ridiculous sentences. They're prosecuting black socialists. And it's like, wait a second. So we're supposed to, and Donald Trump said he was going to jail Hillary Clinton. He didn't do it. He didn't investigate her or anything. He just forgot all about that. You remember that? He said during the debate, oh, you'll be in jail. He didn't do anything. Right. And I mean, it's like Biden is literally criminalizing being a socialist, being an anti-imperialist. Universities are expelling students for protesting for Palestine, right? Universities are literally kicking students out of school because they protest for Palestine under Biden, and Biden supports it. I mean, you look at this. I mean, this is like, it's like Trump may speak worse than Biden on a number of issues, but all the things we are supposed to be afraid of Biden or of Trump doing, Biden is actually doing. The economy is worse. We're having World War III, escalating with Russia. I mean, it's like, show me any way in which Trump was not a better president than Biden. Trump was a better president than Biden. I'll just be real with you all about that. Trump was a better president than Biden has been. Now, maybe Trump will be worse in his second term. I was talking to a friend of mine. Shout out to you if you're watching. He predicted that Trump would be worse than Biden in his second term. And that's possible, right? I mean, and he says that Trump has aligned himself with a lot of neocons, and he's doubled down on supporting Israel and stuff like that. So maybe Trump will be worse than Biden in his next term. So I'm not endorsing Trump, right? And we don't endorse any candidate. I'm certainly not endorsing Trump, but Trump was a better president in his first term than Biden has been in his first term. So, I mean, at this point, giving Trump a second term doesn't scare me at all. And kind of what Gabby says, it would put a smile on my face just to see all the liberals cry. I was a little bit disturbed when Trump won the first time. And then in 2016 and 2020, I was not thrilled to see Trump leave office. I thought that whole thing was some bullshit. And now, honestly, seeing Trump win a second time, will it make things better? Probably not. I mean, maybe a little bit, but maybe not. I'm not confident Trump is going to be that much better than Biden if he gets reelected, but it might be worth it just to see all the like woke hysterical people lose their minds. Some of these people need to to wake up and realize that the country is not with them. You know what I mean? Most people in this country don't think the American flag is the same as a Nazi flag. Most people in this country aren't offended by Christianity existing. Most people in this country don't want to start every meeting at their job with "let's all go say our pronouns." Most people are just tired of this woke crap, right? And on top of that, most people don't want economic degrowth. And most people don't want to hate whatever country we're told to hate and be waving Ukraine flags and all of that, right? So, yeah, maybe these people need a wake-up call. NYC, you also get immigrants. Oh, well, there's a lot of immigrant communities. The neighborhood that I live in, historically, it's Irish and German. But in the 80s, it became an Arab American neighborhood. And now it's increasingly Chinese. A lot of Chinese folks are moving into my neighborhood. New York City, there's a lot of immigrant communities, a lot of them, that are here. And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, immigrants are hardworking people. And let me just throw this out, okay? Because this is one thing that kind of annoys me since we're complaining about liberals, right? Do you know how conservative immigrants are? Right? Do you know how conservative immigrants can be? I mean, it's like liberals have it in their head that like all people that are quote unquote oppressed are woke like they are. No, they are not. No, they are not. Right? Go to a Palestine rally where there's loads of Arab Americans there and see how many of them support abortion. See how many of them support gay marriage. Right? I know they're oppressed. They're supposed to be good. But I'm sure that the overwhelming majority of Arab Americans and practicing Muslims do not agree with gay marriage and abortion. Right? And, even Native Americans, they're not immigrants at all. They've been here before anybody else. But it's like liberals have this image of Native Americans as these idyllic people. It's like a lot of Native Americans serve in the military. There's a very high percentage of Native Americans who go into the military because it's an option that they have, an economic option. A lot of Native Americans are evangelical Christians. Did you know that? I have been to Indian reservations and I tell you Baptist churches and apostolic and Pentecostalism, and there are a lot of Native Americans that are very, very conservative. Now, there are a lot of Native Americans who hold on to the indigenous faith and have kind of a view that they reject European civilization and stuff, but even a lot of them oppose gay marriage. A lot of them think that homosexuality is a disease from the European civilization. We never had that before the white people came and stuff like that. One story that I heard was that there was, Leslie Feinberg, who I used to work with years ago politically. She wrote a lot about how in indigenous communities there were people of different genders, people who changed their gender and stuff like that. And I guess she went to go speak at a university somewhere. And if I remember the story correctly, there was a Native American scholar who was furious, hated her guts, and said this woman has made a career for herself. This white woman has made a career for herself calling my people a bunch of fags and queers. And that's how he saw it. Obviously I wouldn't use that kind of language. And I don't think that's what she was saying, but there were a lot of Native Americans who really hated Leslie Feinberg's work because they didn't feel that they felt she was using indigenous people to feed her own, political agenda of LGBT rights. So, and that liberals, they need to get off their high horse, a lot, working class people. This is very interesting. Working class people globally tend to be economically left-wing, meaning they want jobs and healthcare and education. They want an economy that serves the people, and they tend to be socially conservative. And this is all over the world. They tend to be, the more working class you are, the more impoverished you are, the more into the traditional family, traditional gender roles, the more that you are religious, etc. And that's just the facts, right? If you go around the world, the more working class you are, the more economically left-wing you are, and the more socially conservative you are. Now, I've been described as a social conservative many times. I don't think I am a social conservative. I think gay marriage should be legal because the government has no business telling you what kind of marriage you can have, right? and that applies to polyamory too, right? I mean, hey, if your religion, if your religion says you can have more than one wife or more than one husband, that's between you and God, right? And if your religion, if you're okay marrying another man, marrying another woman, I don't think the government has the right to say that. And unless we have a religious government, which we do not have in America, I don't think the government has any right to tell you what kind of marriage you can be in. So I don't think I'm socially conservative. Am I pro-choice? Yes. I don't think the government should weigh in on issues like abortion, where it's a moral question. You can't prove, right? Where does life begin? Where does the baby have a soul? You can't prove that. So why should we, again, if we don't have a religious government? So I'm for gay marriage being legal. I am for abortion being legal. I am not a social conservative. On the two major issues that determine whether or not someone's a social conservative, I am not a social conservative. But yet it is just common knowledge among the woke left that I am a social conservative. I am a Putinist cultural conservative. How am I a social conservative? I'm a social conservative because I just don't fit in with woke insanity. I take the positions that communists took 10 years ago. Right. And that makes me a social conservative. Right. I don't get this. I really don't get this. This is how nuts the left has really become. But anyway, I digress. All right. Scrolling up. I see a lot of super chats are coming in here. A lot of super chats are rolling in. Where do anti-communist sources for their figures, for the crazy estimates, for the Great Leap Forward come from? Well, here's the thing, right? And I've talked about this before. There were famines in China all the time before the communists took power. All right. And I even made a video, I believe, about this because the Wikipedia page for one of the famines that happened that killed tens of millions of people is tiny because it doesn't have political implications. China was the sick man of Asia. People were starving all the time. You had all kinds of famines. And no one talks about it, right? Let me see if I can find this video because it was one of my better videos. China famine. I mean, I guess this is a video of me debating a libertarian on this point, but this isn't the one I was talking about. I actually made one about the malnutrition or starving. I made a video that was pretty good, right? I made it. It was about yeah. I did a video talking about the famines in China, right? I thought I cannot find this. I cannot find this video. That's very, very, very bizarre. But I will. Yeah, I did debunk a libertarian on the point of here we go. Here's the video. I found it. So I'll show you the two clips I made. This is a short video I made on this question, and I'll show you my going head to head with the libertarian over the video. Okay, right, about the Great Leap Forward. So all right, we'll do that. There, I found it. Took me a while. I just had to find the right terms, right? But here's me talking about the Great Leap Forward. First a video, and then going head to head with a libertarian. Hey folks, I wanted to give a great example of how biased the teaching of history is regarding the 20th century. Folks, the Chinese Communist Party took power in 1949. That's the year the People's Republic of China was declared. That's when the Communist Party came to power. But many, many years before that, 1928, 1929, and 1930, there was a horrendous famine in China. This famine was caused for a number of reasons, most of which can be traced back to capitalism. One of the primary causes of the famine was the fact that the people in China didn't have food because there had been crop failures. And part of the reason that these crop failures were so dramatic was because so much of the arable land in China, where food should have been grown, was being used to grow opium poppies, right? And that's supply and demand. There wasn't money to be made by feeding the Chinese people, but there was money to be made for the international capitalist system and free trade and the British Empire in growing opium poppies. That was supply and demand in action. In fact, let's not forget that the British Empire waged 2 different opium wars to force China to join the global free trade Adam Smith system, tear down any tariffs and barriers and be part of the free trade system. And one great staple of that free trade system that the British and American big multinational bankers and corporations were pushing at the time was opium. A lot of American bankers, a lot of British bankers were involved in the drug trade. And at the time this famine happened, 1928 to 1930, in China, a lot of the arable land was not being used to grow food. It was being used to grow something that was much more profitable for capitalists, opium poppies. Furthermore, China didn't have a strong central government that could be mobilized to carry out relief. The Chinese government was so corrupt and bought off by, multinational corporations and bankers and warlords and local interests, and it was so corrupted by capitalists, it was, being auctioned off to the highest bidder. When this famine hit and millions of people were dying, couldn't get food, the government was paralyzed. It really had no ability to mobilize an effective relief. Now, this famine that happened between 1928 and 1930 in China, 3 years, people were dying in northern China. And while that was happening, the estimates were maybe 3 million people had died. Now historians believe that roughly maybe 10 million people died during this 3-year period in northern China. Horrendous. But you'll notice that the Wikipedia page about this famine in China caused by capitalism is only 3 sentences long. Let me repeat that. The Wikipedia page about this famine caused by capitalism in China is only 3 sentences long. However, we all know there was another famine in China called the Great Leap Forward, where there were some economic hardships that happened in the early 1960s after the Communist Party had been in power, after the Soviet Union had cut off its aid to China. And look at the Wikipedia page for the Great Leap Forward. Paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, all repeating this same narrative that somehow this one famine proves that communism has never worked anywhere and that free market capitalism is the only system. The reason that there are 3 sentences about a famine that took place because of capitalism and many, many, many paragraphs, just a whole big article about a famine that happened under the leadership of the Communist Party is because the famine that happened under the leadership of the Communist Party has propaganda value for Western capitalism. It is something they can use to demonize the Chinese Communist Party, to promote free trade and globalization, to promote privatizations and austerity in Western countries, to promote their myth that greed is good and that capitalism is just an amazing system. And because it has propaganda value, all kinds of things are written about it. In fact, there's even a book that was published about the Great Leap Forward. The photo that is on the cover of this book called Mao's Great Famine is actually from 1946. It was in Time Life magazine. It was one of their photos, and it was in 1946 that this child was photographed being hungry before the communists even took power. That's from another famine, right? So it's not even a picture from the Great Leap Forward, but it's on the cover of this book demonizing the Chinese Communist Party. But no one discusses this famine that happened from 1928 to 1930, where 3 to 10 million people, probably closer to 10 million people, died because of capitalism. It's not relevant. And this famine that occurred from 1928 to 1930 in China was one of many. These kinds of famines happened all the time under capitalism. And it was the Chinese Communist Party that industrialized China. It was the Chinese Communist Party that built power plants all over China. It's because of the Chinese Communist Party that 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. Now, today, China's economy that has 5-year economic plans, that has a huge number of state-run banks and industries, led by a communist party grounded in Marxist-Leninist ideology, socialism with Chinese characteristics, is the second largest economy in the entire world. Huge economic achievements have happened. However, if you listen to the discourse in the United States, you'll hear all about a famine that happened in the early 60s. And this famine, in which capitalism killed millions of Chinese people, you're getting a biased narrative of events. You shouldn't need any further proof of this than that. The fact that you thought communism leads to everyone starving, and you never heard about all the famines caused by capitalism. Furthermore, no one ever bothered to point out that it was communists that made China into a global superpower that it is today, shows that you are being served a completely biased and ridiculous narrative. Yeah. So that's the first thing about the Great Leap Forward that I made. And it just shows you, when I saw, there's a famine that kills, millions of people, and it gets three sentences on Wikipedia because, they can't use it to demonize communism. That right there shows you how biased the sources are. But I also had, I did an open stream, which we need to do one of those again. I know tomorrow night we're with Doug, but maybe Wednesday or Thursday we'll do an open stream, because I really would like to, have an open stream with people again soon. We did an open stream, and some libertarians came on. So this young libertarian guy came on and thought he would just own me by talking about the famine. Right. I mean, and he thought, oh, I got him. And this was our exchange. This was our exchange.
Out of poverty in the 19th, 20th century. Okay. Do you know anything about the Great Chinese Starvation?
Yeah, I do, actually.
It was pretty good, right? Yeah, let's talk about that.
All right. Yeah. So what was China like before the Chinese Communist Party came to power?
Oh, it was terrible. And it got much
like now.
It got much better after they killed all of the people by stealing
No, what is it
farms.
like now? I'm asking you, what is it like now? What is
China like now
compared to how it was before?
So you're saying that
the greatest is China better off now?
So
have millions of people been lifted from poverty. How many power plants were there before the Chinese Communist Party came into power?
Oh, well, did they have pickles
there? How many
there?
are there now?
Did they have pickles?
Steel mills. Did you know China didn't have a single steel mill before the Communist Party came to power? Now they make half the steel in the world. Did you know that?
Before the Super Bowl era, China was way worse off. So I think since we started having the Super Bowl every year,
were there famines before the Chinese communists came to power? Were there famines before they came to power? Now, who cured the famines in China? Hundreds of millions of people were dying every year, over and over and over. People were dying. They had the century of humiliation where
hundreds of millions
all the time under capitalism, under free trade, people were dying. The Chinese Communist Party came in. They
imperialism
brought tractors to the countryside. They brought tractors to the countryside. They mechanized agriculture. And yeah, in the 1960s, there was a horrendous famine in the early 60s.
That just came about. It just came about.
That cured.
It came about.
No, it was a result of the fact that China was an underdeveloped country. That's what it was the result of. It was a result of the fact that China had been an underdeveloped country for so long, and they were rapidly trying to industrialize. And they clearly made mistakes in the process of industrializing. But then the Chinese Communist Party are the ones that prevented China from ever having something like that again, which happened all the time before they came to power. That's what you're missing. Right? I don't understand this. I'm trying to think of an analogy that might be good, but what might be a good analogy? If someone's a drug addict for 20 years and then they go into rehab, and after they've been in rehab for a year, they relapse, right? And then they go back into rehab and then they never use drugs again. Is rehab responsible for them using drugs?
Oh, so you're saying the opposite is true for communism?
I'm saying that communism cured China of having starvation. And you're saying that because there was an episode of starvation in the early 60s, that doesn't count.
Well, what actually happened in 1959? What happened?
What happened? 1959, there was
what
was
happened?
very
Did
bad
someone come to
agricultural
power?
policies that they
Do
were
you know-
trying to rapidly industrialize. The Soviet Union cut them off, right? The Soviet Union had been helping them develop, and the Soviet Union cut them off, and they had people misreporting how much they were growing, and there was confusion, and it led to a disaster. The same kind of disaster that had happened over and over and over again. There was a famine in 1928 where millions of people died. There was a famine in 1946 where millions of people died. There was a famine in 1890 where millions of people died. There was famines all the time. Are those famines the fault of capitalism?
So your analysis is that the Great Starvation that happened in the late 50s and early 60s
is not representative.
No,
of the experience
your characterization.
Bad thing that happened one time that the Chinese Communist Party cured does not speak for the entire experience of that.
I want to ask you though, and I broke your rule.
Back to my drug rehab example, right?
Well,
if
I broke your
uses
rule.
drugs for 20 years, goes into rehab to stop using drugs, then relapses in rehab for a year, and then goes back into rehab and never uses drugs again. Did rehab cause them to be a drug addict?
So my question to you,
in that
situation, it is rehab's fault. Yes, in your retarded
really, even though rehab
analogy.
cured them, but it just had a relapse during the curing process.
I want to know what your honest, and let's have a good faith. Let's have a good faith discussion here.
China before the communists
is your assertion that it was a lack of central planning that caused the Great Starvation in China? It was a lack of central planning caused that?
My assertion is that the Great Leap Forward was a failure as they were trying to set up what they'd never had before, which was a modern agricultural system. And as they were bringing tractors to the countryside, and as they were building power plants, and as they were constructing a national plan in order to get rid of these things,
something the free market didn't do anywhere. Something that wasn't able to be accomplished by the free market anywhere else in the industrialized world.
Really? Because there were hundreds of millions of people that died before the communists came in. In 1928, Edgar Snow, the author of Red Star Over China, talked about how he was in 1928 in China and millions of people were starving to death. And one of the main reasons they were starving to death was because China had no central government to mobilize relief. When the crops failed in one area, the government had no ability. There was no central government. There were warlords that controlled different regions, and they had no ability to bring food. Anyway, so yeah, that was, again, that's how you have to engage with this stuff. And again, if people didn't already have an anti-communist bias, none of that, oh, well, there was the Great Leap Forward, so clearly communism never achieved anything. Look, there was this famine in China. Oh, it's debunked. I mean, no one would fall for that if there wasn't already a huge anti-communist bias in everything people were taught. And it's very frustrating because it's like, I mean, I don't know. It'd be like, imagine that there was a batter and he hit a home run every single day. And then there was one day that he struck out. And then they'd be like, oh, that guy, see, he failed every time. He struck out once. I mean, it's like, that's how they argue, right? It is so dishonest. And it's like, you look at what Russia and China were before the communists and what the communists made those countries into. How in the world can you, what happened with the squad? I don't even pay attention to them. I mean, the last I heard, AOC had a web conference about anti-Semitism or something. And she was all worried about anti-Semitism. Like, she's critical of Israel, but she wants to stop anti-Semitism. And there's this big problem of anti-Semitism. She's on there talking about, I don't know. That's the last thing I heard from the squad. I haven't even heard that much from them. I know, Ilhan Omar, I think, was it Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib? One of them did speak up pretty loudly against Israel and got censored for it. And, other than that, they've been pretty silent. And AOC is fighting the great menace of anti-Semitism that is just everywhere right now, So, yeah, there you go. Compare the 1892 election between President Cleveland and President Harrison to now in 2024, when we're again to have two POTUS for election, 1891. Philip, I haven't studied that election in great detail. I do know that if Donald Trump actually wins, he will be the second president in American history to not serve consecutive terms, right? Generally in American history, every president that we've had serves one term and then they get reelected to serve their next term, or they lose and then they leave politics forever. if Donald Trump wins the upcoming election, he will be the second president in history to serve non-consecutive terms. Grover Cleveland is famous for the fact that he ran for 4 years, he was president for 4 years, he lost the election, and then 4 years later, he won the election. Right. Now, as far as the details about the Lakota War and all of that, I don't know enough about Grover Cleveland. It's weird, right? When I think about American history, and this is, it's like, we think of, the early presidents of the United States, Washington, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, right? Madison, right? We think about the early presidents, and then we think about the recent presidents, right? Right. I can go all the way back to, you had Herbert Hoover, then Franklin Roosevelt, right? Then Harry Truman, then Dwight Eisenhower, and then JFK, and then Lyndon Johnson, and then Richard Nixon, and then Gerald Ford, and then Jimmy Carter, and then Ronald Reagan, and then George Herbert Walker Bush, and then Bill Clinton, and then George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, and then Donald Trump, and then Joe Biden, right? So that's like the recent past, like going back to the end of World War II, the Great Depression, But there's this whole like layer of presidents no one's ever heard of, and a bunch of them are from Ohio, right? And I'm from Ohio, and I remember this when I was a kid. It'd be name all the presidents from Ohio. There's a lot of them. And not Grover Cleveland. And everyone thinks Cleveland because Cleveland is in Ohio, but not Grover Cleveland. But it's like President Polk and President Taylor. And oh my goodness, there's, McKinley and, there's this whole layer of presidents, Howard Taft, President Taft, no one ever thinks about and no one cares about. Because it's like, we know about the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln. You know about Ulysses S. Grant, who was the hero of the Civil War, who eventually became president. We know about Woodrow Wilson, who was kind of a Bonapartist figure in the 1920s. But even like, Calvin Coolidge. Who talks about Calvin Coolidge anymore? I couldn't tell you very much about Calvin Coolidge, right? I don't even know who came before Woodrow Wilson. I don't know. It's like there's this whole layer of American presidents during the era, like, between the U.S. Civil War and World War I. There was a bunch of American presidents that we never think about. There's a guy, James Polk. Who thinks about James Polk? I don't think about James Polk. I'm from Ohio. I've been to the McKinley Museum, right? James Polk, right? Was an American lawyer. President Polk, right? Polk, right? And he was president of the United States. From 1845 to 1849. So before the Civil War, no one thinks about him. No one cares about him. It's like, no one, he just doesn't exist. It's just like, we don't care. Right. McKinley, what I know about McKinley is that McKinley oversaw the U.S. military intervention in the Philippines, the invasion of the Philippines, and that he was assassinated by an anarchist. That's it. That's really all I know about McKinley. And I'm from Ohio. I went to the McKinley Museum. I think I watched fireworks. They did the 1812 overture and shot off cannons and fireworks when I was a kid at the McKinley Museum. I still don't know anything about McKinley. There's a lot, there's a lot of these American presidents. Taft, I don't even remember. Was it Johnson? Right? Was it President? Not Lyndon Johnson. Wasn't there another Johnson in there somewhere? I don't know. There's a whole bunch of presidents we never think about, right? So there you go. President Tyler. Didn't we have a President Tyler? Garfield, right? I don't think about Garfield, right? So I just, there's a lot of presidents that we don't ever remember. And they're all from Ohio. Not all of them, but a lot of them are from Ohio because whatever reason, Ohio was a happening place back in the time when these boring presidents that no one ever thinks about existed. So there you go. Well, the best presidents didn't do nothing. There you go. All right, folks. Well, listen, I'm going to put on the closing music. Be in touch. I'll be back. So it was fun to hang out with all of you, just like always. Tomorrow night, tune in for our stream with Doug Lane and Peter Coffin. That should be good. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.